Some fog patches as well, particularly towards the southeast, first thing Saturday. Otherwise, another bright and blue skies start with actually most places staying dry through Saturday and into Sunday. But then later Sunday, signs of a change. A band of rain pushes into Northern Ireland. That spreads across the UK Sunday night and into Monday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here with you 3 till 6, and it is a lively show today. We start with an absolutely bonkers story. The monarchy is being slammed for historic links to the slave trade. Get this, though, dating back to the 1600s. Is it just the woke mob trying to ruin the coronation? And in other news, argy-bargy, yes, that's right. Local residents want assurances that migrants won't be allowed to roam free in their town in Dorset. Should it be like a prison ship? That's what I want to know. And the National Teachers Union is calling for more drag queens in schools, believe it or not, amongst a whole host of other things. It comes as Channel 4 have launched a new show as well, where people get their kit off in front of kids. Is this indecent exposure? And this is a story that cuts right to the heart of who rules over us. A Tory MP has lost the whip in a lobbying scandal. He joins a rogues gallery of MPs who've lost the whip for a series of misdemeanors. I want to know, are our MPs dodgy? I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Get in touch. Take your pick today, ladies and gents. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Let's lead in with the top one to start with, shall we? Should King Charles apologise for the monarchy's links to slave trade dating back to 1600? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 3, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Met Police workforce. Commissioner Mark Rowley believes there are hundreds of corrupt officers who shouldn't be in the job, and he wants to weed them out. Of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Former senior investigating officer at the Met, Simon Harding, told us vetting should be an absolute priority.
Taken away that kind of process of vetting, which helped identify people at a very early stage. Yes, people would get through. When you cross over from force to force, because you're already sort of branded, if you like, a police officer, the vetting levels aren't necessarily as high as they would be. So, and that can cause a problem. But the intelligence that comes with that person should follow them, obviously, and you should be able to see that. But, you know, I still think there's, and I think everyone does, the level of vetting needs to be much, much stronger.
Former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has pulled out of a climate change event this evening after her husband was arrested and then released without charge. Police remain outside the home of Miss Sturgeon and the former SNP chief executive. It remains cordoned off pending further investigation. Peter Murrell was arrested as part of a probe into SNP finances, including £600,000 set aside for Scotland's independence campaign. Miss Sturgeon insists she had no prior knowledge of police plans or intentions ahead of her resignation in February. A 23-year-old man has denied murdering beautician Elle Edwards in Merseyside. 26-year-old Miss Edwards was shot dead in the Lighthouse pub in Wirral just before midnight on Christmas Eve. Connor Chapman pleaded not guilty at Liverpool Crown Court, appearing via video link from Manchester Prison. He's also charged with possessing a submachine gun with intent to endanger life. And a man who murdered his pregnant wife by pushing her off the edge of Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh has been jailed for 20 years. Vigils were set up near the site following Fawzia Javid's death in September 2021. Kashif Anwar pushed her from the hill, causing multiple blunt force injuries, which also killed her unborn child. She was around 17 weeks pregnant. The Labour leader has called the government's plan to house asylum seekers on a barge evidence of failure. The Home Secretary could face a legal challenge over the plan designed to free up hotels. It includes a leasing agreement to use the Bibby Stock home in Dorset, which can accommodate more than 500 people. Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to get a grip on the backlog of claims.
The government has caused a situation where they've broken the asylum system, got thousands upon thousands of claims that haven't been processed, and the answer isn't more expense for the taxpayer. The answer is to fix the problem, stop the boats with effective action and process the claims.
Drivers face major travel disruption over the Easter weekend, with up to 17 million cars predicted to hit the road. Research by RAC shows 2.7 million car journeys are expected on both Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Holidaymakers booked on cross-channel ferries from the port of Dover are already facing delays of up to 90 minutes for passport checks. Meanwhile, rail engineering work, including the closure of London Euston Station, will make the roads even busier. Travel expert Simon Calder told us it's the wrong time to be carrying out rail works.
It's really odd that, given that the railway, which is, of course, as we have talked about many times, in desperate states in terms of losing 1/5 of its passenger numbers, they've desperately got to get people back. And so what do? Well, they close everything down over Easter so that exactly the people they need to attract, people who are thinking, OK, well, I'll switch from road to rail, just look at it and just think, well, I'm not going to bother with that. It looks an absolute mess.
And the King has signalled his support for research into the British monarchy's historical links with transatlantic slavery. King Charles and the Queen Consort have been at a Maundy Thursday service in York today. The King presented specially minted coins to locals, thanking them for their outstanding Christian service. The royal couple were greeted outside the cathedral by well-wishers and a handful of demonstrators holding banners saying, "Not my King." It's his first Royal Maundy service since becoming monarch. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Patrick.
Yeah, going in strong today. I want to know whether or not you think that the royal family should apologise for links to the slave trade dating back to the 1600s. We're going to talk about that. But first, I'm going to cross live down to Paris because there appears to be more violence and riots on the streets. We can bring you shots there from Paris city centre. There's a restaurant there which is called La Rotonde Montparnasse, which, of course, I'm not particularly familiar with as myself. But there are violent riots taking place. Fires burning in the streets of Paris yet again following a violent response to Emmanuel Macron's pension hike. So he wants to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. Earlier on today, French reports come out, emerging anyway, saying that rat catchers were throwing dead rats at the City Hall in Paris. This now, as we believe, has escalated. There's trade unions on the streets there and clashes with French police. There was a bigger fire erupting at that particular cafe, which appears to have been put out now. But what we can see on the right-hand side of your screen, if you're watching on TV or radio, appears to be French riot police. They've got barricades in front of them. Those barricades have been covered in paint due to the clashes. And towards the other end of the street, by the way, there are still projectiles being launched at those police officers. I would say, from a rough estimate, there's about 20 of them, and they are huddled in a corner. As the camera pans round, there appear to be more riot police clustered to one side of that cafe in Paris, and towards the other end of the street, as the camera pans to the left, what you will be able to see there are, well, anywhere between, I'd say, a rough estimate, around 50 to 100 people, and they are all shouting and screaming and looking incredibly angry. And this is, as we understand it, yet another violent eruption on the streets of Paris as a result of Emmanuel Macron's decision to raise that pension age, the retirement age, from 62 to 64, which has absolutely infuriated a whole host of workers, including, as I said, bizarrely, rat catchers, who did set the tone, according to French media, by hurling the cadavers of rodents at City Hall earlier today. So we'll bring you more as and when we get it. That's Paris now. Probably not necessarily a bad thing that the Eurostar's out of action, is it? But there we are. Anyway, loads to get through. But we start with an attempt to attack the royal family by exposing their alleged links to the slave trade. When will this end, by the way? Do you think that this is just an attempt by the woke mob to cast a shadow over the coronation? With exactly a month to go before that coronation, a historian claims to have found a document dating back, strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen, was this last week? Does the royal family still have ties to the slave trade? What's been going on? Oh, no, it's from the 17th century. The 17th century, that shows a slave trader gave shares to King William III. And King Charles has expressed his support for the first time for research into the historical links between the British monarchy and the transatlantic slave trade. Now, Buckingham Palace has said that Charles takes the issues, quote, profoundly seriously, and the royal household will help with this academic project by offering access to the royal collection and the royal archives. It comes after The Guardian, which coincidentally recently apologised for its founder's own links to slavery, some would argue more so than the royal... Anyway, conducted an investigation into the history of the royal family's potential involvement in the slave trade. There's a lot to get stuck into here, which is, look, does the royal family have something to apologise for? Does the monarchy as an institution have something to apologise for? Plenty of people think that this country has benefited itself off the back of the slave trade, and we all need to acknowledge that and move on. No doubt a lot of you will be looking at your TV screens now, shouting at me, or your radio sets, and saying, well, Patrick, King Charles has already acknowledged the historical wrongs. Prince William has already acknowledged the historical wrongs. And this dates back to the 17th century. Can we all just move on now? With me now is Dr. Zarir Masani, who's a historian of the British Empire and political commentator. And we've got the wonderful Bushra Sheikh as well, and the political commentator. Thank you very much. Look, I will start with you, Dr. Zarir. Does King Charles have to apologise now for the monarchy's historical links with the slave trade? Were there any?
Of course there were links. There were links across most sort of early capitalism between various companies, between the slave trade. I mean, this was happening across the world. It wasn't just the transatlantic slave trade. So I think if people are going to start apologizing, firstly, you have to ask, does it do any good 300 years later to be apologizing for something that was happening all over the world as a normal part of capitalism? And if we're looking at that, there are many other things that capitalism got wrong. There are many people who were exploited in factories. There was child labor. There were all kinds of rather unsavory things that we might apologize for. But I think that the focus should be on modern slavery because today, and this includes Africa, more than 9 million people in Africa are in modern slavery. And Africa was the starting point of the slave trade. Many African chieftains after African kingdoms enriched themselves on the slave trade. Okay. So should they be...
I'll come back to you because there's a lot to talk about here. Bushra, I'll bring you in. This, some would say, is a cynical attempt by left-leaning woke mob to cause as much disruption and bad feeling towards the monarchy just before King Charles's coronation. Your views?
You know what, you're always going to get individuals that are going to be thrown against something. I mean, what I'd like to begin by saying is this isn't King Charles saying that the monarchy and the royal family should be apologising for anything. This is a very, very welcomed move, in my opinion. This is about the British public. This is about how the royal family are going to move forward and build that support for them as well.
Move forward, Bushra. It was in the 1600s, Bushra. We've moved forward.
Look, you know, at the end of the day, Patrick, in order to understand where we are at, we have to understand history and then the context of history. We can't go forward into the future without understanding what our history looks like. It's important in any education facility, in informative information that people have to understand why this country is where it is. I certainly welcome it. I think it's absolutely wonderful that King Charles is supporting this research. It is well needed. And you know what? It's precisely at the right time where this conversation is happening.
OK, why is it precisely... Just, Bushra, I was going to stick with you. Why is it precisely at the right time? Sorry, why now?
We are facing probably one of the biggest culture race wars that I've ever seen in the last 10 years.
So shouldn't we be focused on that, Bushra? Shouldn't we be focusing on that? Why are we looking back to something from the 1600s and not sorting out what's happened today, Bushra?
Because there is a lack of acknowledgement. There are huge links to the transatlantic slavery trade in this country. Especially when we look at the Commonwealth. Look at the Commonwealth. This is something that the royal family genuinely believe. They are not saying we're apologising. They're saying that we are supporting our country. This is what we'd like to do. So why people are raising contention with this is absolutely ridiculous.
Dr. Zaria, has there not been acknowledgement very recently from both King Charles and Prince William? And actually, is the Commonwealth now something that is founded on racism and on slavery? And do the people of the Commonwealth themselves, do you think, actually desperately want some acknowledgement from our current monarch?
No, not at all. I think the British monarchy led the campaign for abolition of transatlantic slavery, so they should be very proud of that. I don't think they have anything to apologise for. I think the Commonwealth is very much a democratic association based on most countries having parliamentary institutions which Britain founded for them. And I really don't recognise where is this race war that Bushra is talking about. Britain is the most culturally assimilated, integrated, tolerant society in the world, which is why immigrants from all over the world want to come here. There's no race war going on.
Bushra, come back to that then, because from a lot of people, Britain is being plunged into fabricated cesspit-like chaos and disasters are springing around us that don't exist. And if aliens looked at us from the outside and listened to a lot of people who read a lot of articles in The Guardian and write a lot of articles in The Guardian, they would think that we were an absolute hellhole. But Bushra, we're not really, are we? And we did do a lot to stop the slave trade.
My position on this is the fact that the UK is one of the greatest places to live. And I'm not saying that, we are directly in a battle of races. I'm saying that these conversations, they exist. We have conversations about racism. We have conversations about ideologies and culture. These things are very, very apparent. This is about the royal family. Let's not sort of veer away from that. The royal family still need to drum up a lot of support. With the Harry and Meghan situation, that clouded the entire royal family. They have to build support again. And understanding and supporting this research is going to do that for them. So it's a very good move on King Charles's part.
All right, look, both of you, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there because I've got to take us back to Paris now. But that was Dr. Zaria Masani, who's a historian of the British Empire and political commentator Bushra Sheikh. Good way to start the show. We love a debate here, but we're going back to Paris. Yes, that's right, with some live shots, because these are the scenes in Paris. Look, we brought to you, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, Violent clashes in Paris. It's happening again. And as we understand it, this is over Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms. Emmanuel Macron, not there at the moment. He wanted to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and that angered a huge amount of the French public, not just in Paris, which is where these images are coming from now, but also in Bordeaux. What you're looking at, if you're watching us on TV or online, if you're listening to us on radio, I'll talk you through it, is riot police armed there with shields and batons and helmets, marching through Paris, trying to push protesters back as smoke and fire rains down there on the street just in front of them. It's hard for me to get an exact figure here, but I would say that the numbers of those protesters have definitely grown since the last time that I brought you these shots, and that was probably only about 10 minutes ago. And we are probably looking at somewhere in the region there, just with my eyesight, of around 50 riot police, and I would say easily quadruple that in terms of protesters. It appears as though they are currently being pushed back now. Again, we can see smoke there, we can see fire, things being set on fire in the streets of Paris. It looks as though it's going to be another day of violence in the French capital. So there we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, look, get your views coming in thick and fast, as you already are. There's a lot, I can see them all coming in, about whether or not King Charles should be really acknowledging the royal family's historic links to the slave trade, if indeed there are that many of them. What The Guardian appears pretty hot on at the minute is a letter that showed that there were some shares passed between Colston, the infamous slave trader, and King William III back in the 1600s as to slavery there. So lots of you getting in touch, and not a lot of you want King Charles to do anything about it. If he apologises, by the way, would you think less of him? GBViews at GBnews.uk. We're moving on from that now, though, because we're going to get the latest on the government's controversial plans to house around 500 migrants on a barge off the coast of Dorset. And this story keeps moving on because Minister Richard Holden has said the boat is, quotes, not a type of prison. And it got me thinking, well, should it be? Because I know a lot of local residents there are very concerned about the idea of these people, all single men, all young single men, potentially being able to come and go as they please around that area. It is a dockyard. It is, of course, a harbour area there, so other people have boats more. There'll be houses and shops. Holden made his comments as it was confirmed that at least 437 people crossed the channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. And GB News viewers can actually see footage of even more migrants who arrived at Dover earlier today. Hundreds of single males are due to be housed on that boat, which is called the Bibby Stockholm, off the coast of Dorset. And that is despite threats of legal action and opposition from local Tory MP Richard Drax. Olivia Rutley joins me now, our political reporter, who's outside the Home Office. And Olivia, this really is hotting up, isn't it? And a lot of the locals want desperate reassurance that people will not be allowed to roam free if they're on this barge. And they don't really seem to be getting that at the minute, do they?
No, well, ministers have said that it's expected that refugees will spend most of their time on the barge, but obviously there isn't any legal framework in place to make sure that sort of aim, desire, hope, it's not clear, is actually followed. So, yes, local residents are pretty worried. And you say it's controversial. It is very controversial indeed. The government is essentially fighting on 3 different fronts on this plan. So you've got the residents on one side, supported by the local Conservative Council and the local Conservative MP, Richard Drax. They're actually threatening legal action against the Home Office because they're worried not just about migrants walking around their town being free to come and go as they please, as you suggest, but also having that barge so near to the coast in a popular seaside town. They're worried about the effect it'll have on the tourist community, on tourism and on the local community. Then, of course, you've got MPs on the right of the party, and you can see this being reflected in the right of centre newspapers, who are worried that actually this is going to turn into not a deterrent for migrants, but actually quite a comfortable stay. There are reports in The Sun and in The Telegraph too that these barges will have gyms, pool tables, great TVs, etc., all the sort of mod cons that you might expect in a luxury hotel. And in fact, the providers of the barge say that it is luxury accommodation. So they're fighting on that front too. And then, of course, you've got the human rights lawyers who tend to be on the left, who are arguing that by sort of clumping all these migrants together in detention centres essentially offshore, you run the risk of having another Manston-like problem, that fiasco that we saw a few months ago when there was a bottleneck of migrants all being held in what were considered inhumane conditions in the Manston facility, and disease was spreading like wildfire. So there's a worry that issue could be repeated. The government is very keen to reassure people who are worried about that there will be good healthcare facilities on board this barge. But yes, the government is now fighting on three different fronts, and it's becoming very controversial indeed. This barge is expected to house about 500 people. Obviously, that's a drop in the ocean when you consider that 437 people came to the UK on small boats yesterday. The government then is planning another barge which could house up to 2,000 migrants. But if it's this hard to get the first one through, it's hard to imagine what it'll be like with the second.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Rutley there, our political reporter outside the Home Office. I am loving, by the way, that a series of MPs are coming out now and being asked, well, would you live on this barge? Would you live on this barge? And they're kind of pussyfooting around it. Just say, no, I wouldn't, because it's supposed to be a deterrent. If people really wanted to live on the barge, then it wouldn't be a deterrent, would it? And that's why we're doing it. But anyway, call me a dreamer. Moving on, counter-terrorism officers are investigating the hundreds of colleagues in the Met Police accused of sexual offences and other crimes. So get this, the police taking off the streets, not investigating terrorism, investigating themselves. Madness. I want to know, is that the best use of people who are meant to be keeping our streets safe? And I believe I can take you a quick shot now back to Paris. Why not? Been to Paris more times in the last half an hour than I've ever been in my life, but there are scenes in Paris. Supposedly there have been violent clashes before. We did show you earlier imagery of things being set on fire, etc. It is, amongst other things, by the way, about the rising of the retirement age from 62 to 64. You're looking at shots of riot police there. If the camera was to pan round to the left, you would see quite a lot of people, way above 100 people, maybe a couple of hundred people, who are protesting. A cafe was set on fire earlier, and believe it or not, rodent catchers threw dead rats at the City Hall in Paris. And the French, clearly not happy. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. Keep your views coming in thick and fast. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I'll be back in just a tick.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very, very closely, ladies and gentlemen. That is Paris that you're looking at there, where protests continue over, amongst other things, Emmanuel Macron's pension age hike, the retirement age hike. We saw violent clashes earlier on. We'll keep you updated. Hundreds and hundreds now of protesters, and it looks as though the number of riot police are increasing as well. More on that as we get it. But now, though, back at home to an alarming report that exposes just how many criminals and people accused of sexual offences are working in the Met Police. So almost 100 officers have now been diverted from tackling counter-terrorism and other serious crimes to investigate their own colleagues. And that is absolutely staggering, isn't it? The Met are there to protect us, aren't they? And they're not. They're looking at themselves. Here's some of the key facts that show the extent of the problem. 49 Met Police officers have convictions for crimes of dishonesty or violence. That's from a total of 161 officers with criminal records. The Met will look again at 689 cases involving sexual offences or domestic abuse that have already been investigated. A total of 701 officers are currently on restricted duties. And this is such a serious issue that 90 Met officers have been diverted from investigating counter-terrorism and serious and organised crime to look into their own force. Let's get more on this shocking story now with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's outside Scotland Yard. Paul, thank you very much. Couple of layers to this. The amount of police there who are under investigation and the amount of police who are having to investigate the police and not patrol our streets.
Yeah, and this is all part of trying to restore Londoners' trust and confidence in the Met Police. In fact, the Met Police regularly check up on the levels of trust. They survey the levels of trust from Londoners. If you go back to 2016, Patrick, the public trusted, 90% of the public trusted the Met Police. At the end of last year, that had fallen to 66%. Now, it's crept up a little bit to 70%. Clearly, there's some way to go to getting it back to levels that were in the 90s, but this comes after that thorough Casey report that found that the Met was institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Also the cases of David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, former Metropolitan Police officers who are now serving time for horrendous crimes. And this is part of a process that the Met will go through over the next few years. Today, Mark Rowley, the Met Police Chief, saying that in the next 6 months he expects almost 100 officers to leave the force, and that could be stretch off into the hundreds over the next 3 to 4 years. So 1,131 cases being reinvestigated, officers being reinvestigated for sexual violence and domestic abuse. 4 in 5 of those cases are being reassessed now. And on top of those figures that you just gave, the Met's 50,000 employees, their records also being checked against the Police National Database. We know that 10,000 have been checked so far. Of those, 38 potential cases of misconduct, 55 cases of off-duty association with a criminal. So Mark Rowley also pointing out today that he has asked Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, to give him more powers to sack these officers, because officers serving in the Met, in fact police officers all over the country, they're not subject to the same employment law that affects the likes of you and I. They're subject to police regulations, and when the Met sack someone, they fall under the jurisdiction of independent legal tribunals, and those bodies have the power to then reinstate those officers. If the Met then want to reverse that decision, they have to take it to a judicial review. So effectively, Sir Mark Rowley saying to Suella Braverman, give me the powers to sack these officers without recourse for them to be then reinstated. And we're waiting to hear, hopefully by the end of the month, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, whether she will announce that she's giving those powers, those beefed up powers, to Sir Mark Rowley to sack his officers. But this is going to be a process that takes some time to restore levels of trust and confidence in the Met.
Yeah, indeed. Paul, thank you very, very much. Paul Hawkins, our national reporter on the steps of Scotland Yard. Loads more coming your way between now and 4 o'clock. Get a load of this, OK? as the UK's biggest teaching union votes in favour of drag queens being invited into schools, more of them, by the way, are young kids being over-sexualised? I just want to know why. People always say, well, why not? Yeah, but why? Answer me that. And after yesterday's shock arrest of Nicola Sturgeon's husband, the former SNP leader pulls out of a public appearance. There we go. We'll be live at the scene outside Nicola Sturgeon's home. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Met Police workforce. Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley believes there are hundreds of corrupt officers who shouldn't be in the job, and he wants to weed them out. Out of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Figures also reveal 161 serving Met officers have criminal convictions. Labour has described a plan to house asylum seekers on a barge and disused military bases as evidence of failure. That's after the government confirmed it's signing a deal to use the Bibby Stockholm, as it's known, which can accommodate around 500 people. The plans are designed to free up hotels, which are currently housing more than 50,000 asylum seekers waiting for their claims to be processed. And police investigating the spending of Scottish National Party finances have been seen removing boxes of evidence from the home of the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Yesterday, her husband, the former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, was arrested and released without charge. Ms Sturgeon was due to attend a climate change event this evening, which is now cancelled. The King has signalled his support for research into the British monarchy's historical links with transatlantic slavery. King Charles and the Queen Consort have been at a Maundy Thursday service in New York today, where the monarch presented specially minted coins to locals, thanking them for their outstanding Christian service. The royals were greeted by well-wishers, and there was a handful of demonstrators there holding banners reading, "Not my King." On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app, you're with GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound will buy you $1.2419 and €1.1399. The price of gold is £1,613 and 16 pence. The FTSE 100 is currently at 7,732 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Are the kids all right? That's what I want to know. We told you yesterday that the president-elect, just about, of the UK's biggest teaching union has claimed the government is brutally racist, that the country is brutally racist. Well, now the National Education Union is under the spotlight yet again after its members bizarrely voted to invite more drag queens into schools. Now, the Drag Queen Story Hour company has held events all over the country, despite a number of protests from concerned parents. Teachers have now given their backing to inviting LGBT plus authors to speak in schools, which is, let's be honest, slightly different to the old Drag Queen Storytime stuff. Earlier this week, though, Channel 4 broadcast a programme as well called Naked Education, where adults strip naked, full frontal, in front of children as young as 14. Joining me now is transgender teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton. Debbie, look, great to see you. Thank you very much. A couple of things for us to talk about here. First things first, what is the educational benefit of Drag Queen Storytime?
Well, there isn't, and it's really concerning, is this, Patrick? You know, we've talked about Drag Queen Story Hour in libraries and how that's inappropriate, but to actually bring this into schools, these are adult entertainers, remember, who are appearing in role, and we're bringing them into school. Now, it's bad enough in libraries, but at least in libraries, children don't need to go. The parents don't need to send them there. But when this happens in schools, it's really difficult to opt out, if indeed it's possible to opt out. What are these people thinking about? That would be my question.
I'll tell you what they're thinking about, Debbie. They are saying that it is to challenge the heteronormative culture that is dominating our education system, Would you mind having a go at explaining me what that means, and also whether or not this is going to combat that, or if it needs combating?
Well, it's nonsense, isn't it? You know, what does heteronormative mean? You know, there has to be a normal. But what do these things mean, and where are these ideas? Where do these ideas come from? The NEU's issue is that they have rules which allow the LGBT group within the union to submit a motion to conference, and then it's really difficult for conference to vote that motion down. What was interesting was that there was multi-points to this, but the first point was about having the union supporting Drag Queen Story Hour in schools. That was number one on their list. But then when it came to the NEU press release, it wasn't mentioned. So I suspect there's differences of opinion in NEU. They have a problem here and they need to sort it out.
Just on a slightly different note, Channel 4's Naked Education, where fully grown adults strip butt naked in front of kids as young as 14... It just got me thinking, are we over-sexualising or, well, quite literally, indecent exposure towards kids here? I mean, what is going on there?
Well, it's just wrong, and it's hard to see how this can be beneficial to anybody and what they're actually trying to do. Is it to bring the viewers in? Is it to try and shock or disturb? But at the centre of this, there are children, and you mentioned 14-year-olds, and 14-year-olds should not be exposed to this.
Look, Debbie, thank you very much. And we're going to be talking about this throughout the course of the show. And I'm really, really pleased that you've given us a bit of context there from your perspective, because we've got a debate on this later, and I think you've answered a lot of questions pretty directly there. So thank you very much. Debbie Hayton there, who's a transgender teacher and journalist. And it comes down to this for me. When they go, oh, well, why not? The implication there is you must be some kind of transphobe or homophobe. No, just explain to me why my future children should have Drag Queen Story Hour. Just maybe that's the way of it. I mean, could I go in and read to kids, or would I have to be in drag? Anyway, MP Scott Benton, moving on, has been accused of sleaze after offering to lobby ministers on behalf of a fake company. But it got me thinking, just how dodgy are our politicians? And these were the scenes in Paris a few minutes ago where protesters set fire to a restaurant. It's kicking right off in Paris. It's showing no signs of stopping. It is initially about pension reforms, but it's also about anti-globalist protesters and people who think that Emmanuel Macron is behaving undemocratically. More on that as we get it. I'm Patrick Christys, and we are GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are. We don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Coming up this week, a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life and explore the meanings of charity and faith. Happy Easter. Hallelujah. The meaning of Easter with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, this week on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Live scenes from Paris as violence erupts yet again in response to initially Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms, hiking the age from 62 to 64. There's a whole host of other dissatisfied people wrapped up into it as well. We saw cafes ablaze. It comes after a week of pretty much solid protests in a variety of different French towns and cities as well, including Marseille, Lyon, Lille, and what you're looking at there, Paris, Bordeaux, where the town hall was set on fire earlier. Rat catchers threw dead rats at City Hall in Paris. We're looking at Fire Brigade there. People of the Fire Brigade, it would appear to me, with their helmets on, with the French flag, running through. Now, it appears to me as though they've joined the protesters. I'll await confirmation on this, but it certainly does not look as though they are there to stop any protests. So that is quite big, isn't it? Of course, that will be in relation to pension reforms. So it looks to me there as though the Fire Brigade has now joined this latest round of protests in Paris. If the camera was to pan to the left, what you would see are a growing number of French riot police, and we're seeing, it looks as though there's kind of like smoke grenades going off there in the centre, although they are doing absolutely nothing to disperse that crowd. We'll bring you more on that as we get it, because it's hotting up in Paris. But closer to home, it is the start of the new tax year today, and you can expect a whole lot of change. As Jeremy Hunt's budget kicks in, bringing adjustments to pension pots, business taxes and personal taxes. And benefit rises in line with inflation also come into effect today, which could impact around 2 million squeezed households. Who better to pick through all of this with and explain it all for us than our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Yes, Liam, look, thank you very, very much. So, new tax year.
Yeah, lots of detail here, Patrick. Lots of changes, of course, with the new tax year. The first thing to say is that the state pension's going up, and we can see that here on a graphic. It's going up by 10.1%, so that's roughly in line with inflation, and also universal benefits too. So right there, millions and millions of households affected. That full state pension, that's if you started claiming your basic state pension after 2016, it's up from £185.15 a week to £203.85 per week. Again, important information for a lot of GB News viewers and listeners. And aside from that, council tax is going up, water bills are going up, your road tax, vehicle excise duty, as they called it. So in many of our interactions with the state, benefits are going up, but also costs are going up.
Absolutely. Now, I'm hearing a lot about thresholds, OK? Talk me through thresholds.
Thresholds. Right. When people like me talk on budget day, we go, tax thresholds are being frozen. Oh, you're going to get stitched up when your tax thresholds are frozen. And it's nothing about, putting parts of your body in the freezer or anything like that. It's what it sounds like. What it's about is a process called fiscal drag. Now, bear with me. Strap yourself in, because I'm going to try and explain this live on national television. It's not often that this happens. Right, so let's have a look at the scores on the doors. The first £12,000, £12,570 that anyone earns, they get a personal tax allowance, which means they pay no tax on that. That is your personal allowance. That tax allowance, that £12,570, that level has been frozen until 2028. What does that mean? That means that if your wages go up and if inflation goes up, the threshold is frozen, so you pay a higher share of your wage in tax, and more people are drawn into that part of the income scale where they start paying tax. If you go from like £9,000 to £12,000, you start paying tax because the tax threshold is frozen for 4 years. Now, from £12,500 odd pounds to £50,270, we're on the second line now, you pay the basic rate of income tax, that's at 20%. And again, those thresholds are frozen until 2028. So again, as wages go up, more and more people are dragged into paying the basic rate of income tax. And it's the same all the way up the income scale. The higher rate, from 50,000 odd to 150,000, if you're a real high roller, you pay 40% tax on that slug. But now it's going from 50,000 to 125,000. You pay 40% because you pay 45% now above 125,000, not above 50,000. And so all of this is complete gobbledygook to lots of people. But this is what it means on the next graphic. What it means, Patrick, is that even if you are an average worker, the average worker in the UK earns 30 grand, with no changes to the rate of income tax, with no changes to headline tax levels, because these things are frozen, you will be paying almost £400 more in tax per year. This is fiscal drag, because you get dragged in to a higher tax bracket. And also that means over the 4-year period of the freeze, Patrick, 3.2 million more people will go from earning below the personal allowance, so they don't pay tax. These are often, part-time workers, little jobs that people have when they're looking after the children, and they will start paying tax because the threshold is frozen. And at the top end of the income scale, 2.6 million more people will become higher rate taxpayers, so paying at 40% rather than 20%.
I think this is absolutely astonishing, really, because it can, and it will feel for a lot of people like a smash and grab, as well as the cost of, frankly, everything else going up as well. Do you think, in your view, this kind of almost it removes the incentive in a way to get on?
I think it's completely anti-aspirational. I really do, because if you are one of those middle-income workers, you're doing well, you've got a good job, you're in middle management, you're on 45 grand, what is the incentive for you to earn more? Because it's just going to push you up into the top tax bracket where your tax rate will double.
Yeah.
And this is why so many people, and I'm not just talking, conservative backbenchers, I'm talking about red wall Labour politicians too, who know all about aspiration, who know all about proud families trying to get on and do what for themselves and their kids. They don't only like the fact that people will be paying more tax, even though they're on quite modest incomes. 50 grand, you're quite a senior teacher, a not particularly senior administrator. These aren't massive jobs. You're not wealthy if you earn 50 grand, and yet suddenly you're paying tax at 40%. And I think a lot of people don't like the sneakiness of it. It's sneaky to freeze the tax thresholds as if people don't understand what's happening. Well, hopefully after the last couple of years, Patrick, a few more people do understand what's being done in their name. It's called freezing the tax thresholds, it's called fiscal drag, and it is the way that governments get more money out of us when they haven't got the guts to tell us.
Yeah, look, Liam, thank you very, very much. That was incredibly useful. I must say, that explained it all to me, and that takes some doing, as you well know. So thank you very much. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, with On the Money. Let us know what you think about all of that. Are you going to be affected? Are you going to be dragged into all of this? gbviews@gbnews.uk. I suspect some of you might now be thinking, well, am I getting value for money with my tax? I look at my public services and all of this. Am I actually paying it into the right areas? Well, look, moving on from that, what kind of related, actually, given that was a bit of a political story, economic, of course, but it's politicians who do it to us. Here is a question for you. Just how dodgy are our politicians? We're often told that public's trust in MPs is at rock-bottom levels. Look, public trust in MPs has been at an all-time low ever since records began, and it just keeps getting lower, rightly or wrongly. But now Scott Benton has lost the Tory whip after he was caught offering to lobby ministers on behalf of gambling interests. So Keir Starmer reacted to that story by claiming that Tory sleaze is back, baby. But there's quite a few of them at it as well, because he's not the only one at all. There are around 15 MPs currently in the House of Commons at the minute who have lost the whip for a variety of different misdemeanours. Let's speak now to John Girlis from the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, which is the body that represents lobbyists. Look, thank you very much. This looks a bit dodgy, to say the least. Are our MPs dodgy?
It's very dodgy what happened, certainly with Mr. Benton yesterday and what was exposed. And I think the sad thing for the hard-working and good parliamentarians that we see across the House is that examples like this are now becoming too frequent and damaging the trust even further. As you said, trust is already at a premium when it comes to parliamentarians. Unfortunately, we're seeing that eroded even more. And that's because the rules quite clearly are not fit for purpose when it comes to lobbying. MPs know that they shouldn't be offering advocacy services. Unfortunately, in this example, that they were offered quite blatantly. Although no rules were broken, the offer of breaking them was pretty clearly there. And what we're calling for is actually clearer rules so that lobbying activity is more transparent, is more open, so that the public can have some confidence that those that are trying to influence our parliamentarians are doing so with a degree of transparency.
Look, we've got to be fair to Scott Benton here. I want you to outline exactly what it is that he's done and why there's such a hoo-ha about this in particular. What specifically is it?
Well, MPs are banned from providing advocacy services for payment. So he was offered, obviously by a fake company, money to provide services to lobby ministers on their behalf, of the gambling industry. And that goes against the rules. They're not allowed to lobby and they're not allowed to provide parliamentary advice. So he broke the rules. But more to the point, I think it clearly shows that businesses, I think most concerningly, was the fact that he suggested he and colleagues of his had done this or are doing this currently with other businesses. The businesses need to understand that they can't expect parliamentarians to wear two hats. You can't inform government if you're also there voting on laws.
Look, thank you very, very much for whizzing us through all of that. It's John Girlis there from the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. It represents, they obviously do a lot of work in this particular area as well. Now, I think the bigger thing for me about all of this is, yeah, all right, things like this are dodgy, and I'm going to whiz you through in a second anyway. Some other MPs who've lost their wit for a variety of different reasons. But do you not think the more concerning thing, in a way, is that it's a bit thick, isn't it? Don't you have to be a bit thick as a serving MP to think that you're going to get away with stuff and that there isn't going to be some kind of sting operation in the day of the camera phone and Zoom calls, etc.? I mean, I'm arguably more concerned about that than anything else, the stupidity of it all. And these people are supposed to be making our laws. But Scott Benton has lost a whip, and there are 14 other MPs in the same boat. So 7 people have had the Tory whip suspended. They include Andrew Bridgen, Matt Hancock and Christopher Pincher, who was at the centre of the controversy that led to Boris Johnson's downfall as Prime Minister. 6 other MPs have lost the Labour whip as well. They include Jeremy Corbyn and Nick Brown, who is himself a former chief whip, believe it or not. And Jeremy Corbyn, of course, in particular, was for rather very controversial issues, of course, wasn't it, as well, in terms of anti-Semitism, etc., which he denies, etc. Claudia Webb, someone, again, who's a household name for all of the wrong reasons. There was a huge amount of hoo-ha about her and some of her behaviour. And 2 other people are also sitting as independents, and they are Jonathan Edwards, who was elected as Plaid Cymru MP, and the former SNP MP, Margaret Ferrier. Margaret Ferrier went on what some have called an international COVID tour. Haven't they? After she tested positive for COVID, then knowingly came down on the train. Well, look, there we go. I mean, what do you reckon to that, ladies and gentlemen? Do you really think that our MPs are fit? Are they actually adequate enough to be ruling over us? Do you have respect for them? Do you think they're a bit mistreated? Do you think they're hard done by? But yes, moving on. The royal family is under fire for its alleged links with the slave trade, and this has kicked right off in the inbox. It's in, get this, the 17th century, OK? And I want to just go to a couple of your emails very, very quickly on this. I was asking whether or not you think that King Charles should apologise for the royal families or the monarchy's links to slave trade going back to the 17th century. Absolutely not, says Glenys. If he does, I will lose all respect for the monarchy. He cannot give in to the woke mob who are just trying to ruin his coronation. That is from Glynis there. OK, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And yet again, we're off to Paris, people. Yes, there we go. These are live shots from Paris, where, as we can see, there are violent protests taking place. Massive amounts of criminal damage taking place on the streets there. These are ostensibly, anyway, to do with Emmanuel Macron's pension hike and, his pension reforms, the year that you're allowed to retire from 62 to 64. It's an ongoing series of protests. There have been violent clashes between riot police and French protesters. It all looks relatively sedate at the minute, but we will bring more to you as and when we get it. I'm Patrick Christys, and this, ladies and gents, is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. I've got a lively hour coming your way. We start with a massive row, the royal family being dragged into historic slave trade issues. Isn't it time the woke mob let it go and stop trying to ruin the coronation? In other news as well, argy-bargy, yes, controversy over this migrant barge in Dorset. They're saying that it won't be like a prison ship, but should it be? Should migrants be allowed to roam free around that area? And drag queens in schools, people. Yes, more absolute lunacy. All I want to know is why. Why does the National Union of Teachers want to have more drag queens in schools? What's going on there? And just to round us off, not so smart, are they? No, there will apparently be no more smart motorways built in the foreseeable future. Good, as far as I'm concerned, they are an absolute raging death trap. Get your views coming in on all of that. I'm Patrick Christys. Let's go. Yes, I promise you I'll read more emails out this hour. It was jam-packed last hour, wasn't it? But gbviews@gbnews.uk is that email address. Will you lose respect for King Charles if he apologises for historical links to the slave trade going back to the 1600s? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and hello to you. Well, efforts to weed out hundreds of potentially corrupt police officers from Britain's biggest force is now underway. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Metropolitan Police Force. Of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will now be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Former senior investigating officer at the Met, Simon Harding, says vetting should be an absolute priority.
Taken away that kind of process of vetting, which helped identify people at a very early stage. Yes, people would get through. When you cross over from force to force, because you're already sort of branded, if you like, a police officer, the vetting levels aren't necessarily as high as they would be. So, and that can cause a problem. But the intelligence that comes with that person should follow them, obviously, and you should be able to see that. But, you know, I still think there's, and I think everyone does, the level of vetting needs to be much, much stronger.
Labour has described a plan to house asylum seekers on a barge and disused military bases as evidence of failure. That's after the government confirmed it signed a deal to use the Bibby Stock home in Dorset, which can accommodate around 500 people. The plans are designed to free up hotels, which are currently housing more than 50,000 asylum seekers waiting for their claims to be processed. Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to get a grip on the backlog of claims.
The government has caused a situation where they've broken the asylum system, got thousands upon thousands of claims that haven't been processed. And the answer isn't more expense for the taxpayer. The answer is to fix the problem. Stop the boats with effective action and process the claims.
Police investigating the spending of the Scottish National Party finances have been seen removing boxes of evidence from the home of the former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Yesterday, her husband, the former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, was arrested and released without charge. Ms Sturgeon was due to attend a climate change event this evening, but she's now cancelled her appearance. She insists she had no prior knowledge of police plans or intentions ahead of her resignation in February. A man who murdered his pregnant wife by pushing her off the edge of Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh has been jailed for 20 years. Vigils were set up near the site following Fawzia Javed's death in September 2021. 29-year-old Kashif Anwar pushed her from the hill, causing multiple blunt force injuries, which also killed their unborn child. Before dying, she managed to tell a woman that her husband was behind the attack. A 23-year-old man has denied murdering the beautician Ellie Edwards in Merseyside. 26-year-old Miss Edwards was shot dead in the Lighthouse pub in Wirral just before midnight on Christmas Eve. Connor Chapman pleaded not guilty at Liverpool Crown Court, appearing by video link from Manchester Prison. He's also charged with possessing a submachine gun with intent to endanger life. Drivers face major travel disruption over the Easter weekend, with up to 17 million cars predicted to hit the road. Research by the RAC shows 2.7 million car journeys are expected on both Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Holidaymakers booked on cross-channel ferries from the Port of Dover are already facing delays of up to 90 minutes for passport checks. Meanwhile, rail engineering work, including the closure of London Euston Station, will make the roads even busier. Travel expert Simon Calder told GB News it's the wrong time to be carrying out rail works.
It's really odd that, given that the airway, which is, of course, as we have talked about many times, in desperate states in terms of losing 1/5 of its passenger numbers, they've desperately got to get people back. And so what do? Well, they close everything down over Easter so that exactly the people they need to attract, people who are thinking, OK, well, I'll switch from road to rail, just look at it and just think, well, I'm not going to bother with that. It looks an absolute mess.
Simon Calder. This is GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Republicans are being accused of just trying to do their best to destroy the monarchy just before King Charles's coronation. I'm going to be telling you exactly why very shortly, but I've got some quick clips, I believe, from Paris. Live in Paris, there you go, where protesters are kicking off yet again. Now, it looks relatively sedate at the minute. I'm just going to give you a bit of context here because we're dipping in and out of Paris because there are protests taking place. Firstly, in the realm because of the retirement age going up from 62 to 64. But also there are anti-globalist protests taking place, pro-democracy protests taking place, saying that the French government is pushing reforms through without any kind of vote. People protesting apparently about the fact that Emmanuel Macron is in China at the minute and not actually in France, sorting this mess out. This is quite sedate at the moment, but previously we had flames erupting from cafes, we had projectiles being launched at police, tear gas, what looked like tear gas, being thrown in the other way. We will keep going to Paris for you as it looks. Those numbers, since I came on air at 3 o'clock, you could maybe see about 50 people. Now, what's that? Good grief. 500? 600? And the police force is ramping up as well. Mark my words, it's going to kick right off in Paris and we will bring that to you. Right, but back home. Back to the very heart of our country, actually, the royal family. Now, there is an attempted attack, in my view, on the royal family taking place at the moment, desperately trying to expose their alleged links with the slave trade, with exactly a month to go before the coronation. A historian claims to have found a document dating back, get a load of this, people, when will this be now? Oh, will King Charles himself have been pro-slave trade, do we think? Oh, don't. No, the 17th century, the 1600s. It's one document that shows a slave trader gave shares to King William III, right? King Charles has expressed his support for the first time, though, get this, for research into the historical links between the British monarchy and the transatlantic slave trade. So this is the new line doing the rounds today. King Charles has been forced to come out and say he supports an investigation into the royal family's historical links to the slave trade. Buckingham Palace said that Charles takes the issues profoundly seriously and the royal household will help with the academic project by offering unfettered access to the royal collection and the royal archives. Well, it comes after The Guardian, which, coincidentally, complete coincidence this, recently apologised for its founder's own links to slavery, conducted an investigation into the history of the royal family's potential involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Now, loads of you have been getting in touch on this. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Do you think that this is absolutely pathetic, that they should all just let it go, that we don't need to apologise for anything? Or would you lose respect for King Charles if he now comes out and feels compelled by the woke mob to say, oh, I'm terribly sorry about all of this? Oliver's been in touch. Now, Oliver is just 21 years old, according to this email, which I think shows that there's some hope still for the future. King Charles should absolutely not apologise for the slave trade. Though it was an abhorrent time and affected loads of people, we mustn't forget that it took place a long time ago and we were intrinsic in blocking the slave trade after that. Anne says, slave trade, I'm fed up with these idiots telling me what is correct. I'm 65, I can make my own mind up. She wants an apology from the Romans. She wants an apology from the Romans. What about the Vikings, Anne? What about the Vikings? Anyway, I just think it's absolutely bonkers. I'm joined now by the royal historian, Rafe Hadelman-Coo. Rafe, thank you very, very much. Should King Charles grow a backbone and say, look, back off with all this slave trade stuff? You're talking about a letter from the 1600s. It's got naff all to do with me. I'm not going to engage with you.
Yeah, look, apologising for the slave trade achieves nothing. And all that it really does, it's never going to placate those who make the loudest noise over all of this. The race grifters who make their money from stirring up racial grievance and manufacturing, actually, are completely artificial grievances for the modern age. And so we have to ensure that we don't do things like this, which actually embolden enemies of Britain and the monarchy. It also somehow suggests that the modern royal family is somehow culpable for the sins of the past. But as we all know, the sins of the father cannot be meted on the son. Nobody today bears any responsibility or guilt for slavery, and no one today has any right to apologise or any ability to apologise for what's happened in the past. But it's important to note, His Majesty has not apologised for slavery. In the past, he's expressed his deep sorrow for the act of slavery, which is fine. It's not an apology. He's been very keen, finely tuned statement that he made there.
The question is what more, Rafe, because he's apologised. Well, not apologised, sorry. He said he's profoundly, saddened by the whole thing. So's William, OK? So these are two people very recently who've come out and acknowledged that the slave trade is bad. everyone with a head on their shoulders knows that the slave trade was bad, OK? So what more do these people want from King Charles? And these idiots who are outside now, as King Charles goes and attends a church service with "Not my king," not got a job, those things should say, I think. Why aren't they at work? But is this just part of a groundswell now of some kind of anti-monarchy group bubbling away just before the coronation?
Well, it's no surprise that you're having these sorts of stories leak now in this critical period between the king's accession and the coronation, when actually all focus is supposed to be on the positive side of monarchy. The king is supposed to be renewing his bond, renewing the bond and the covenant and contract between the monarchy and the people. And we should actually be trying to create the most positive vibe for the nation to come together, because, you know, it's things like the coronation and jubilees that provide those rare opportunities in this country when we can come together and create moments of national unity and have a coming together and a social cohesion with street parties and so forth. We don't have a national day like the French or the Americans or most of the world to celebrate every year. So these are the rare occasions when we can come together. So anything that detracts from that, be it Harry and Meghan shenanigans, or be it these stories about slavery or calls for abolition of the monarchy from Australia to Barbados, all of these things that distract. And you have to actually wonder why so many of our newspapers are so gleefully taking part in this, by which I mean The Guardian and The Independent, as well as the BBC. I mean, if you read the newspapers today, you would think that this document from the 1600s proves that Kensington Palace, which was under construction at the time that William III got this money, was built by slave money. But actually, if you look about it, King William III only got £1,000 from this, which in today's money is £163,000. An absolute drop in the ocean compared to the wealth that King William III had when he was building Kensington Palace.
But you would also think,
There's no link between slavery and...
You would also think, and you would be forgiven for thinking this, especially if you were a bit younger and you were looking at some of the online stories now, which has got King Charles's face and then slave trade, slave trade, slave trade written all over it. In this day and age at the minute, you would be forgiven for thinking that King Charles himself personally, as a result of these articles, has got something to do with the slave trade. Look, just fill me in. Does the monarchy actually have anything to apologise for? Historically, doesn't matter how far back we go now, Rafe, does the monarchy have anything to apologise for? Has the monarchy been built off the back of slaves? Because people say we can't move on as a nation until we acknowledge our historic wrongs. So come on, what are we acknowledging?
All right, well, look, in terms of the economy, only 3% of the British economy in around 1770 had any relation to the slave trade. So this myth that we hear a lot in this country now, that the empire, the industrial revolution, and the monarchy's wealth was built on slavery, is absolute nonsense. You know, the trade in sugar, which was one of the great slave trading commodities, was no bigger than hops and the items made in the brewing industry. No one today claims that it was beer that built the Industrial Revolution or the empire or the monarchy's wealth, and yet that's a comparable amount of money to what we're talking about here. And yet all of this has been completely glossed over by the media and by academics who have ulterior motives at play here, which is to undermine the monarchy, undermine Britain, and indeed undermine the West and our values. Look, the past is the past. In the 1600s, we were executing people for witchcraft in England. Yeah. It's time that we got some perspective over this. These are simply manufactured grievances. And those who are making this argument, who don't have, who essentially have very limited historical knowledge. Remember, it was King George III, as a teenager, who wrote a compelling essay saying slavery had no moral basis and was an abomination. It was King George III who signed the abolition of the slave trade bill in 1807, making Britain the first country leading the world in the abolition of the slave trade. It was his son who abolished slavery in the British Empire in 1833, and successive monarchs have actually been so progressive in terms of race relations compared to the average society of the time, from Victoria to Edward VII.
Look, Rafe, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. Rafe Haydoll-Monkey, the royal historian and absolute fan favourite here on GB News. Look, I just think this is absolute drivel. I tell you what, I just hope, for the love of God, that King Charles doesn't feel the need now, because of some of these idiots, to come out and start apologising for stuff that he's got absolutely nothing to do with. I want to see him show a backbone. I want to tell him to send these people packing and he can just enjoy his coronation in peace. But there we go. Now, though, to the latest on the government's plans to house around 500 migrants on a barge off the coast coast of Dorset, Minister Richard Holden has defended the policy, saying the boat is, quote, not a type of prison. And I wanted to know whether or not you think it should be a type of prison, because residents are concerned that people are going to roam free and that might have issues in their local area. It's been confirmed that at least 437 people crossed the channel in small boats yesterday alone. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. If you're watching on GB News on the telly right now or online, you will see footage of more of them arriving at Dover earlier today. Hundreds of single males are due to be housed on what's called the Bibby Stockholm, which is that boat on the screens right now, off the coast of Dorset. That's despite threats of legal action and opposition from local Tory MP Richard Drax. I'm going to go now to our political reporter Olivia Utley. Now, Olivia's outside the Home Office for us. Olivia, look, thank you very, very much. This is kicking right off, isn't it? And it's not going away anytime soon. The local residents, I think, understandably want clarity on whether or not these people on this barge, all young single men, will be allowed to just roam free. And they're not getting it. The Home Office hasn't even been in touch with the local area.
No, and it doesn't sound like they're going to get it anytime soon. At the moment, ministers are saying that they expect that migrants will spend most of their time, that's a quote, on the barge. But obviously, there's no sort of legal framework in place to ensure that they do. So local residents aren't happy at all. The council isn't happy. The local MP, Conservative MP, Richard Drax, isn't happy. And they're actually considering mounting legal action against the Home Office. Well, that just shows the depth of the feeling against this policy if a Conservative MP and a Conservative council want to take on the Conservative government over it. And of course, this barge is only intended to house about 500 migrants. They're planning another one for 2,000 migrants. Well, could something like that secure the local popular vote? There are local elections coming up and the Tories can't afford to lose any more votes.
Look, Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley there, our political reporter outside the Home Office. I can't be the only one thinking that this Conservative government have missed an absolute trick here. Why don't they decide to plonk some of these sites in actual Labour seats, or more of them in Labour seats, and force the Labour MP there to have a position, and force the Labour Party into a desperately awkward situation where they have to say, well, we want to throw our arms around everyone who comes across the channel, just not these people in our area. It always seems to be in the Tory areas where this is taking place. Councillor Jim Draper joins me now, though. He's the chair of Portland Council. Thank you very much, Jim. Great to have you on the show. What's your main concern about this barge?
Well, it's basically we don't know anything about it. You know, I've just had an email from indirectly from the Home Office saying they might meet us on the 18th of April to tell us what's going on. It would be nice if they'd have sort of worked out what they were going to do before they announced the barge, wouldn't it?
Jim, just on this then, because has this just come through to you now? You've literally just had some communication in a roundabout way from the Home Office, haven't you?
I've just had a communication in the last 20 minutes that they will be talking to us on the 18th of April and telling us what's going on.
OK. And what could they...
Told us a little bit earlier, since if they do have plans to actually, and they have worked out what they're going to do, rather than thinking it backwards, it would be nice if they'd have said so beforehand. I'm dubious about whether they actually have thought of it. I thought someone had this idea, let's bring a barge in, it makes a good story, but I don't think they thought it through carefully enough. Maybe they have, but we'll find out next week.
Jim, so this is really seriously, though. Yeah, this is seriously live breaking news, because when I came on air at the top of this hour, you had not received any communication from the Home Office. Now you just have. They've said that they're going to have a consultation with you. Jim, what are you going to be saying at that meeting? Is there anything that they could say to you?
They're going to tell us what they're going to do.
Go on, Jim. I think we've still got you, Jim. Just talk to me. What could they say to you that would make you feel better about the thing? No, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave Jim, I'm afraid, because we can't quite hear him. But there we go. Well, what you did manage to hear there is that after weeks, really, of going back and forth and desperately trying to get some communication from the Home Office, they've managed to, in the last 20 minutes, just get an email, a roundabout communication from the Home Office that says they're going to have a consultation with local people in Portland, in Dorset. The concerns from the locals there centre mainly around absolutely no information given to them, the potential health and safety risk and the impact on public services that it could have. Bear in mind, around 500 single men, young males, are going to be plonked on a barge in a harbour in Dorset, and there was no consultation about that whatsoever. There is a flip side to this, though. There is a flip side to this. Let me just play devil's advocate for a second here. Some parts of the UK are going to have to do their bit, aren't they? If we're going to actually have sites that are going to act as a deterrent, this is one thing I would have asked Jim, act as a deterrent to actually stop the Channel migrant crisis, there are going to have to be some sites, I'm not saying it has to be this one, but there's going to have to be some sites a bit like this, aren't there? So are you all happy for it to be in someone else's area but not yours? Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. If we're going to have a deterrent, we're going to need some form of deterrent, aren't we? And it has to be something like that. There you go. Now, we're moving on because a coroner has said that 2 pensioners sadly died because their car broke down on a smart motorway. Now, get a load of this. Just how dangerous a smart motorway is. I think they're unbelievably dangerous. Apparently, there's going to be no more built, not before time. They have been an absolute disaster waiting to happen, smart motorways. Talking of a disaster, we're going live to Paris now, then. Because, yes, there are still clashes taking place, and we join you live, don't we, there, as the protesters and police charge towards each other on the streets of Paris. Another day of violence, numerous protests taking place. They are, well, I suppose, supposedly anyway, around the pension age rising, the retirement age being risen from 62 to 64, but there's a whole heap of other protests wrapped up in it as well. Tear gas being deployed there, smoke grenades, it would seem, and riot police very much in place. Cafes were on fire earlier. I tell you what, it doesn't really matter that we've got all those queues at Dover, does it, and the Eurotunnel, etc. You wouldn't want to go to Paris now anyway. I'm Patrick Christys, this is GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. I'm going to take you back over to Paris now, where, frankly, absolutely anything could happen. There are live shots coming to us of yet more riots and disorder on the streets of Paris, the French capital. Now, civilians are clashing with police as protests over pension reforms continue, but I am informed that it's not just about pension reforms. It is also about anti-globalism, supposedly, just protests about Emmanuel Macron in general and the government in general, people feeling dissatisfied at the perceived lack of democracy in France at the moment, things being rushed through without a public vote or a vote in their parliament as well, on a variety of different things. But that main one, though, is, of course, about the retirement age, the state pension age, being raised from 62 to 64. The government narrowly survived a no-confidence vote on Tuesday evening, and there have been several nights of sporadic demonstrations. We've had them in Marseille, we've had them in Lyon, Lille, and you are looking at them in Paris there. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people gathering on the streets. Bear in mind that when I started this show an hour and a half ago, there was probably around 50. There are now loads more. There has been a huge police presence. We've seen fire officers, fire brigade staff, it would appear to me, joining those protests. They were charging through, waving the French flag as smoke grenades, etc., hailed around them, and French police, riot police, were there on hand. Cafes have been set on fire, shops have been set on fire. We will bring you that live as we get it, because it does look like an absolute powder keg, ladies and gentlemen. Riots in France. Right, but yes, we're moving on now, because Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has called claims that police are in partnership with the Scottish National Party over the timing of Peter Murrell's arrest a conspiracy theory. Now, look, yesterday we brought you news that Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was arrested at home amid a probe into SNP finances, OK? Now, this then prompted questions after the dust settled. He's been released without charge pending investigation. But when the dust settled, people started asking the question, hang on a minute, did the police time this in conjunction with the SNP so that it was after the leadership election where Humza Yousaf was anointed as the new First Minister of Scotland? It comes as Nicola Sturgeon's husband was, as I said, arrested yesterday in relation into that investigation into their finances, the SNP's finances. Mr Murrell has since been released from custody, but detectives remain at their Glasgow home. Tents erected outside. Reports yesterday of shovels digging up the garden, which sounded a bit ominous, didn't it? And even searching a barbecue, etc. outside. So joining me now is data journalist at The Spectator, Michael Simmons. Michael, thank you very much. I tell you what, this is how you move a story on, isn't it? Is there any credibility to the idea that the police were somehow in conjunction with the SNP about the timing of this arrest?
Well, to not give a straight answer, we're not very sure. On the specific day itself, initially they'd said that Nicola Sturgeon had been seen by neighbours leaving the scene before the police arrived, but we now know that wasn't the case. And actually, plainclothes police in unmarked vehicles had arrived when she was still there. So that suggests that they didn't know about the timing of the arrest. Because of the rules around what can be said about investigations, they're not being clear about if there's any likelihood of prior knowledge about the investigation in general. So we're not going to find out about that for time to come. But certainly there's people within the party suggesting that maybe Nicola Sturgeon, if she didn't know about the arrest, she knew what way the investigation was going. So that may have been a factor in her resignation, but we just can't really speculate.
Michael, why are some people saying that Kate Forbes, who ran against Humza Yousaf, would currently be First Minister of Scotland if this arrest had come earlier on? Why are people saying that this may have benefited Humza Yousaf?
Well, I think because Humza was seen and presented himself, really, even if he didn't use the words, as the continuity candidate. I think he'd said something about how Peter Murrell was a proven election winner and he could stay on as chief executive if he wanted to back at the time before he had resigned. So I think that Kate was seen as much more of a change candidate who wanted to reform the government and the party. So if this news had come out during the election, then that would have helped Kate. Although you can see it from both ways, that if this had happened during the election, people would have said, oh, well, the police have interfered in the election contest and against Humza. So it's a difficult position.
It is a difficult position. Do you think this is why Sturgeon stepped down?
I'm not sure. I have to say, I honestly don't know, and I probably wouldn't want to speculate. It maybe has influenced the timing of when she specifically left office, but whether it's why she resigned, I couldn't say.
No, absolutely fair enough. Look, Michael, thank you. And I'll be talking to you, I imagine, rather a lot about this in the coming weeks. And I look forward to that. Michael Simmons there, who is data journalist at The Spectator. Yet again, important to say that Peter Murrell, who is Nicola Sturgeon's husband, has been released without charge pending investigation. Want to make that crystal clear. OK, so loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Look, are house prices going up or down? We'll analyse the latest figures. This is big stuff. We'll also find out why 100 counter-terrorism and serious crime officers in the Met Police are, instead of helping you stay safe on the streets, they're actually investigating their own colleagues. And yes, I will also be getting to your emails about whether or not you think that King Charles should even be entertaining some kind of investigation into the monarchy's historical links to the slave trade. And when I say historical, I mean from the 1600s. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Right now, it's your headlines with the wonderful Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Efforts to weed out hundreds of potentially corrupt police officers from Britain's biggest force are currently underway. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Met Police. Of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will now be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Figures also reveal 161 serving Met officers have criminal convictions. Labour has described a plan to house asylum seekers on a barge and disused military bases as evidence of failure. That's after the government confirmed it signed a deal now to use the Bibby Stockholm, which can accommodate around 500 people. The plans are designed to free up hotels, which are currently housing more than 50,000 asylum seekers waiting for their claims to be processed. Also in the news, police investigating the spending of the Scottish National Party finances have been seen removing boxes of evidence from the home of the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Yesterday, her husband, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, was arrested and released without charge. Ms Sturgeon was due to attend a climate change event this evening, but she's now cancelled her appearance. And the King has signalled his support for a search into the British monarchy's historical links with transatlantic slavery. King Charles and the Queen Consort have been at a Maunday Thursday service in York today, where the monarch presented specially minted coins to locals, thanking them for their outstanding Christian service. The royals were greeted by well-wishers and a handful of demonstrators holding banners which read, "Not my King." On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now back to Patrick.
OK, welcome back. It's an eclectic mix of stories on this show, ladies and gentlemen. I promised you a lively show and you're getting it. But here's something now about house prices, because average UK house prices have risen for the third month in a row. So much for a crash, eh? On an annual basis, house prices were 1.6% higher than a year ago, slowing from 2.1% in February. And the main factor behind rising prices is an easing of mortgage rates. That's according to Halifax. So look, I wanted to answer some pretty basic questions for you, really. Is it a good time to buy? Is it a good time to sell? What does this mean going forward? Joining us is our very own economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Now, Liam, we're going to get stuck straight into this, because what does this really mean for people like you and me or anyone out there who's looking to be in the market?
So a lot of people did talk about a housing crash, you're right, but for the last 3 months, prices have kept on going up. So in March this year, so last month, the average house price was £287,880. That's 1.6% up on March 2022.
Or a box in London.
Yeah, for a garage. And in February, the average house price was 285,660. So from about 285.5 to 288,000 pounds in 1 month. That's the increase. So that's pretty chunky. And I think the reason this is happening, there are two main reasons. Firstly, there's just a fundamental shortage of homes in this country, as we've often talked about, Patrick. But what's also happening is that even though the Bank of England has been raising interest rates, and it's raised interest rates 11 times in a row now, and we're at 4.25%, and we may yet get one more rise, even though that's happened, since last October, when you had that mini budget, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, when the sort of financial markets, the money markets went to these technical terms, to these budget measures, since that sent the money markets into a bad temper, and that meant that mortgage rates suddenly shot up from about 4% to 6%. You know, lots of house price deals fell through. Lots of people were about to buy a home. They couldn't buy a home. The mortgage offers were withdrawn and all the rest of it. And that really did, you know, hit the housing market hard last autumn. But since then, because interest rates they've been going up, but there's signs that they're now peaking and that quite soon they'll be coming down again. The actual mortgage rate, even though the Bank of England's base rate has been going up, the actual mortgage rate from that high at the mini budget has been coming down. So around the time of the mini budget, if you wanted a 2-year fix, you'd pay more than 6%, right? Now you're paying less than 5% for a 2-year fix if you shop around, even though the base rate of interest has actually gone up. I remember I said a few months ago, here in this seat, I said, even though interest rates are going up, mortgage rates will start coming down. And I got absolutely hammered. Loads of sort of GB News viewers and listeners email, what's he talking about? Doesn't know what he's talking about. But this is what actually happens when interest rates come off a peak and you've got base rates, a sense that they are going to start soon coming down, mortgage rates then start coming down.
What do you reckon is going to be the effect of NIMBYism? Now, look, I can completely understand this, because if I bought a house near a field in a nice area, that was probably one of the reasons why I bought the house. And I wouldn't want 200 houses going up next door to me. Who would? OK, but at the same time, at the moment, we have nowhere near enough houses, and it is causing massive issues for people. So what is the effect of NIMBYism? How do we combat it?
So NIMBYism is rational for the people who own the homes, but it's completely irrational and deeply, deeply counterproductive for society as a whole. I actually wrote a book on how you combat NIMBYism, and the way you do it is that when the land is given planning permission, the value of the land can go up not just 2 or 3 times, it can go up 200 or 300-fold, the value of it. And I've argued for many, many years that a big chunk of that increase in value, so-called planning uplift, should go to the local authority to build the schools and hospitals and roads and bypasses and shops, infrastructure and everything else. That means more and more people are likely to actually support new housing because they may have young children, they want a local school. So that's how you get around NIMBYism. But at the moment, we're nowhere near that with the British government. There's not enough imagination to bring that kind of thing in. And it strikes me that unless we get hold of this problem, Patrick, the birth rate in this country is going to fall. How many young people do I know who are living in shared accommodation? They're not starting families because they haven't got a place of their own, let alone buys, even to rent a place of their own where they can feel secure and they want to build a life and a family. So this is a major, major problem. And, you know, you look at the press and, house prices are still going up, rock on, it's no problem. But I know that at least half of adults are thinking, actually, I really wanted a house price fall because I want myself or I want my kid to be able to get on the housing ladder. So this is not necessarily good news that house prices are still going up. Now, a really sharp house price crash, that would be bad news, because that would knock the stuffing out of the economy. But a gradual correction with houses being, 3 or 4 times annual income what they were on average when I bought my first house, rather than what they are now, 8 to 10 times annual income. Because if it's 8 to 10 times annual income to buy the average house for the average wage, 2 people working full-time can only borrow 3 times their income each. So they can't ever afford a home. And that's before you start factoring in childcare. So this is a major, major problem.
Absolutely. And you raised such a good point there about the infrastructure to go around it. They're near where I live at the moment. You're seeing all these new developments go up and you think, OK, great, there might be places for people to live. We're not seeing any new schools. There's no improvement to the roads whatsoever. The traffic's already a nightmare.
So it changes the political geometry because a lot of the NIMBYs, they just don't want the hassle of building, right? They don't want it. But on the other hand, and everyone else who's nearby just doesn't say anything and lets the NIMBYs get their way. But if there is going to be a new school, if there is going to be a new bypass, if there is going to be a new hospital, Other people will say, actually, we do want these houses. And also some of the NIMBYs might think, this could actually increase the value of my home because my home will be in more of a place that matters with better transport links and all the rest of it. Many countries around the world, Hong Kong, Germany, Austria, Australia, New Zealand, some states in America, they've benefited hugely from using this planning uplift to make places without using state money. And we desperately need to do it in the UK.
Liam, thank you, as ever. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, with On the Money. Right, OK, so we are going to go to this story now. And this is a very, very serious one, actually, ladies and gentlemen, massively serious. It affects millions of you. And it is in relation, anyway, to a coroner who said that 2 pensioners died because their car broke down on a smart motorway. Just how dangerous are these smart motorways? I think they are absolute nightmares. Whoever designed them, I'd like to go and talk to them right here in this studio, actually, because it's an absolute shocker. Smart motorways, no, put them in the bin. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. We are GB News. Yes, we are indeed. Sorry, I'm just getting in my ear. We're going live back to Paris now. There we go. More violence in Paris, although it does look rather sedate at the minute. What you're looking at is shots there from in amongst the riot police, and there are hundreds of riot police currently patrolling the streets of Paris. Earlier on, it looked like we're going to get a bit of a charge there, but earlier on we can see now, actually, them squaring off with protesters in Paris, and this is initially, anyway, about them raising the pension age from 62 to 64. We all know that now, but other people have jumped on, disaffected French people, and it's not just in Paris that we've seen the violence as well. We've seen it in Bordeaux, we've seen it in Lyon, we've seen it in Lille. And now hundreds, if not thousands, actually, of people are gathering in Paris for what looks like it's set to be another day of violence in the French capital. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, actually? Just hear me out on this. They don't like the idea the pension age is being raised. Does anyone else think they might be able to afford to retire a bit sooner if they weren't here and they were just busy at work? But there we go. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back now to a big development that affects millions of road users. It's been reported that no new smart motorways are set to be built in the UK because of serious safety concerns, and it will leave loads of you, no doubt, thinking, why is it taking this so long? Viewers on GB News can now see footage of the M4 near London, where work to turn the route into a smart motorway was finished last year. There we go. It's an absolute car park, so not exactly a great situation to be in there, is there? Anyway, it was supposed to keep traffic flowing more smoothly, but the absence of a hard shoulder, proper hard shoulder, anyway, has led to the deaths of many, many people. Today's news comes a day after a coroner said that an accident on a stretch of the M1 in South Yorkshire, which left 2 pensioners dead, would not have happened if there had been a hard shoulder. And just before I go to my guest, can anyone else just think this, which is how obvious is that? How obvious is it that if you remove a hard shoulder from a motorway, it becomes less safe? I am joined now by Claire Mercer, from the campaign group Smart Motorways Kill. Look, Claire, thank you very much. If it's all right with you, would you mind just giving me a bit of context about your family's, well, terrible experience with a smart motorway? Is that OK?
Yeah, no problem. My husband was killed on a smart motorway 4 years ago. He just set off for work at 8:15 one Friday. He had a minor collision with another motorist. It should have just been, an inconvenience, a bad start to the day. But because they were at a sign that said no hard shoulder for 4 miles, and 4 years ago we knew less about smart motorways than we do now. They didn't know what to do, I assume. And I don't know if they also assumed, like a lot of other people, that the technology actually works. Perhaps they thought the gantries and things would pick them up. But it's your legal obligation to stop after an accident. They had no hard shoulder. There was nowhere else for them to go. So they actually, you can see them on CCTV travelling a distance, trying to find a safer place to stop. They pulled over as far left as they could, but they couldn't get their vehicles out of the live running lane because of the crash barrier, and they themselves couldn't get over the crash barrier because there was a 30-foot drop. So the 2 of them ended up stood in a live lane at 8:15 on a Friday morning, and the inevitable happened. A HGV that can't manoeuvre like a Fiat 500 ploughed into them bodily and spread carnage across 4 lanes of the motorway. And even when there was absolute carnage across all 4 lanes of the motorway, even then the technology didn't work and didn't pick them up. And the road wasn't closed till nearly 10 minutes later, when members of the public were phoning in saying, close the road, for God's sake, close the road.
I'm very, very, very sorry to hear that, and it should never have happened. And unfortunately, it was a deadly accident waiting to happen, because anyone in their right minds can see that if you remove the hard shoulder, then it becomes less safe. And if you do not have the technology, which would be the one saving grace to all of this, if technology worked, I've reported on situations where the cameras on smart motorways fog up and they have to point them towards the sun instead of looking down at the road, and look, terrible things like this happen. So do you want to see an end to smart motorways forever and the idiots who came up with the idea held to account?
Definitely, that's what I've been trying to do for the last 4 years. Our only agenda as Smart Motorways Kill is to get the hard shoulder back on every single motorway. I don't care if they call it a redesign. I don't care if they want to save face. I don't care if they want to admit they've wasted up millions of pounds, billions of pounds of the taxpayers' money on something the taxpayer doesn't want. I don't care what they say, but we need a hard shoulder back on every single motorway. And, I mean, they justified it. I read a report just after Jason was killed that justified removing the hard shoulder because it would save the average commuter 4 minutes a day. So that's 2 minutes to work and 2 minutes from work. Well, So they killed my husband and a 22-year-old and Derek Jacobs and Charles Script and Nargis Begum just on that strip of M1 alone for 2 minutes a day anyway, which is absolutely barbaric. But then, I don't know about the other incidences, but in my husband's case, the road was closed for 9 hours and there was a lot of people trapped for many, many hours. They had to do a backwards release of a rear release of the traffic bit by bit. And that wiped out everyone's 4 minutes for the entire year, and 2 people died. So it doesn't save. You said yourself, the traffic jams, it doesn't save any time. It's a money-making scheme for the private contractors. That's all it is. It's the contractors that have been putting pressure on to say, don't you dare scrap these motorways.
Talk to me a bit more about that then. You think it's a money-making scheme. I must say I was very taken aback then when you put it into the context, I was quite moved actually then, to put it into the context of, in order to save people 4 minutes, which I don't think is true anyway, is it? To save people 4 minutes, that was the amount of time that they essentially valued your husband's life at. Is absolutely shocking, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you read these reports and they've got KSI formulas. I didn't know what a KSI formula was. It's killed, seriously injured. They have a formula to work out the acceptable number of deaths from this project. They sat down and worked out, I don't know how many deaths that it came out. I was appalled to learn a KSI formula exists. But they said XXX is an acceptable number to kill or seriously injure with this project. And I mean, they just add up these minutes and say it'll save 100,000 people 2 minutes. So they get a very, very big number and it looks grand. I hate to be graphic, but it works. It sticks in your mind. My husband and Alexandru Mergeniu were splattered across 4 lanes. It was absolute carnage. I had to ring the police and say, I think my husband's in that crash. It was all over South Yorkshire. It caused mayhem. And it took so long. When they came to me, they said, we didn't know who was with which vehicle. Possessions and everything are spread so far and wide. And because both vehicles were work vehicles as well, they weren't in their names. But the carnage, the absolute carnage that was caused by this, I never got his phone back. We don't even know where his phone went. These people were hit bodily because in these instances, you have a problem, you get out your car. Every one of these people killed on that stretch was hit by a HGV bodily. So it's not just numbers, it's people. And you're right, it doesn't save you 2 minutes a day because you get into a traffic jam at least once a week. So that wipes out your 2 minutes. It is all about these. I think I read somewhere that a 15-mile stretch was over £1 billion contract to a private contractor. That is what is all about. And for the last 2 years, I've been saying, all right, don't be human. Don't think of the people. Think of the cost. We're broke. As a nation, we're broke. Stop spending the money on something we don't want. And only now are they starting to say, actually, yeah, we are too skint to do this.
Look, Claire, I almost, actually, for once, I'm lost for words, actually, because that is just it's such a vivid account. And I'm so sorry for you. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through that, Claire, and that your family have as well. And hopefully something can be done about it. Look, Claire, thank you very much for coming on and for giving us that account. And I hope the people who are responsible for smart motorways and who maybe have made a bit of money out of it actually are looking at this now and watch this when we clip it and put it online and just think, was it all worth it? Claire Mercer there from the campaign group Smart Motorways Kill. Gosh, right, OK, we'll move on from that, ladies and gentlemen, now. And it's that alarming report that exposes just how many criminals and people accused of sexual offences are working in the Met Police. Almost 100 officers have been diverted from tackling counter-terrorism and other serious crimes to investigate their own colleagues. So you might see fewer police on the streets, potentially, or people working in counter-terrorism. Why? Because they're looking after their own colleagues there to find out whether or not they themselves are indeed criminal. Here are some of the key facts for you that show the extent of the problem. 49 Met Police officers have convictions for crimes of dishonesty or violence. That's from a total of 161 officers officers with criminal records. The Met will look again at 689 cases involving sexual offences or domestic abuse that have already been investigated. A total of 701 officers are currently on restricted duties. And this is such a serious issue, though, that the Met has 90 Met officers being diverted from investigating counter-terrorism and serious organised crimes to look at their own force. I'm going to go now to our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. He's outside Scotland Yard. Look, Paul, those stats are bleak to look at. Can I just ask, though, in the round, when we look at how many Met police officers there are, look, forgive me for asking this, but I'm going to ask you, is this problem being blown out of proportion or not?
The Met would say not. Certainly Sir Paul Rowley would say not, given the lack of trust that there is in the Metropolitan Police at the moment. Look, the Metropolitan Police monitors regularly through surveys the levels of trust that Londoners have in it. And in 2016, that was at 90%. End of last year, it dropped to 66%. It's nudged back up to 70%. But because of the Casey report, because of David Carrick, because of Wayne Couzens, a lot of people, particularly women, have lost a lot of trust in the Metropolitan Police. So Sir Paul Rowley today is saying that, look, we've started this investigation into 1,131 officers re-investigating these allegations of sexual violence and domestic abuse. We've uncovered at least 4 out of 5 cases where that is going to need re-investigation, and it's the tip of the iceberg, because he said that over the next 3 or 4 years hundreds of officers are going to have to leave the force, and that it's all very well having officers fighting crime, but if the public doesn't have trust and confidence in you in the first place, then it makes it much harder to carry out your duties. So that's what they're doing at the moment, trying to reinvigorate levels of trust from the public in the Metropolitan Police.
Exactly. Paul, thank you very much. Paul Hawkins there, who's outside Scotland Yard for us, our national reporter. Right, OK, so look, the royal family is under fire for its alleged links to the slave trade, believe it or not, all the way back to the 17th century, so the 1600s. Now, look, this is just, make no mistake about this, people, this is just an attempt by the woke mob, the Republicans out there in this country, to try to whip up an unnecessary slave trade storm to tarnish the coronation. It needs to stop. We're going over to Paris now, though, quickly, because we're bringing you live updates from Paris as there are clashes between riot police and protesters. It is in part over pension reforms. It is also about anti-Macron sentiment, anti-globalism sentiment as well, and a few other disaffected people there. There have been smoke grenades, there's been riot police involved, there's been shops set on fire. It frankly is a powder keg, and it could kick off properly at any moment. We'll bring that to you as and when we get it, though. But yes, look, keep your views coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm going in again in just a second on whether or not you think our king has anything to apologise for the slave trade. I think not. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's News Channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very good evening, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News with you for the next hour, and there is loads coming your way. Massive controversy now over King Charles and the monarchy and their alleged links to the slave trade dating back to the 1600s. People want him to apologise. I think he needs to grow a backbone and just say no. Moving on, though, yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is also a riot raging in Paris. We can see live footage of it right now. That is the back end of it, but there have been violent clashes between the police and protesters, smoke grenades going off left, right and centre, shops on fire. We'll bring more of that to you very, very shortly. Closer to home in Dorset, argy-bargy, yes, that's right. So local residents are saying that they actually would quite like that barge in Dorset to be something like a prison ship because they haven't got any clarity whatsoever as to whether or not the people on it will have free roam over their town. Get a load of this, though. Would you allow your kid to go to a drag queen story time in schools? The Teachers' Union has just said they want more of it. I just want to know why. What's the benefit of it all? Are kids being over-sexualised far too young? And a final one to round us off with as well. Not so smart. We just heard a harrowing testimony there of a lady who sadly lost her husband on a smart motorway. These things, ladies and gentlemen, are death traps. Apparently, there's going to be no more of them. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Get your emails coming in thick and fast. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think King Charles has anything to apologise for the slave trade? I think not. I've nailed my colours firmly to the mast there as well. Drag queens in schools and smart motorways. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight, efforts to weed out hundreds of potentially corrupt police officers from Britain's biggest force are currently underway. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Metropolitan Police Force. Of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will now be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Former senior investigating officer at the Met, Simon Harding, says vetting should be an absolute priority.
Taken away that kind of process of vetting, which helped identify people at a very early stage. Yes, people would get through. When you cross over from force to force, because you're already sort of branded, if you like, a police officer, the vetting levels aren't necessarily as high as they would be. So, and that can cause a problem. But the intelligence that comes with that person should follow them, obviously, and you should be able to see that. But, you know, I still think there's, and I think everyone does, the level of vetting needs to be much, much stronger.
Labour has described a plan to house asylum seekers on a barge and in disused military bases as evidence of failure. That's after the government confirmed it's to sign a deal to use the Bibby Stockholm in Dorset, which can accommodate 500 people. The plans are designed to free up hotels, which are currently housing more than 50,000 asylum seekers who are waiting for their claims to be processed. Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to get a grip on the backlog of claims.
The government has
caused a situation where they've broken the asylum system, got thousands upon thousands of claims that haven't been processed. And the answer isn't more expense for the taxpayer. The answer is to fix the problem. Stop the boats with effective action and process the claims.
Now, police investigating the spending of Scottish National Party finances have been seen removing boxes of evidence from the home of the former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Yesterday, her husband, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, was arrested and released without charge. Miss Sturgeon was due to attend a climate change event this evening, but she's now cancelled her appearance. And she insists she had no prior knowledge of police plans or intentions ahead of her resignation in February. Now, a man who murdered his pregnant wife by pushing her off the edge of Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh has been jailed for 20 years. CCTV images have been released showing Kashif Anwar and Fawzi Yajaved walking behind him. The 29-year-old pushed his wife, who was 17 weeks pregnant at the time, down the hill. She fell 50 feet and sustained multiple blunt force injuries. But before dying, she managed to tell a woman that her husband was behind the attack. And a 23-year-old man has denied murdering beautician Ellie Edwards in Merseyside. 26-year-old Miss Edwards was shot dead in the Lighthouse pub in Wirral just before midnight on Christmas Eve. Connor Chapman pleaded not guilty at Liverpool Crown Court, appearing via video link from Manchester Prison. He's also charged with possessing a submachine gun with intent to endanger life. And drivers face major travel disruption over the Easter weekend, with up to 17 million more cars predicted to hit the road. Research by the RAC shows 2.7 million car journeys are expected on both Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and holidaymakers booked on cross-channel ferries from the Port of Dover are already facing delays of up to 90 minutes for passport checks. Meanwhile, rail engineering work, including the closure of London Euston Station, will make the roads even busier. Travel expert Simon Calder says it's the wrong time to carry out rail work repair.
It's really odd that, given that the railway, which is, of course, as we have talked about many times, in desperate states in terms of losing 1/5 of its passenger numbers, they've desperately got to get people back. And so what do? Well, they close everything down over Easter so that exactly the people they need to attract, people who are thinking, OK, well, I'll switch from road to rail, just look at it and just think, well, I'm not going to bother with that. It looks an absolute mess.
And finally, the King has signalled his support for research into the British monarchy's historical links with transatlantic slavery. King Charles and the Queen Consort have been, meanwhile, at a Maundy Thursday service in York today. The Queen presenting specially minted coins to locals, thanking them for their outstanding Christian service. The royal couple were greeted outside the cathedral by well-wishers and a handful of demonstrators holding banners saying, "Not my king." This is the first royal Maundy service since becoming monarch for the King. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
Do you think that King Charles should have anything to do with a new report into whether or not the royal family has links to slavery in the 17th century? I certainly don't think so. We're going to be talking about that in a moment, but I'm taking you live to Paris now, where there has been more violent protests taking place. So these are live shots from Paris, where protesters are rushing at riot police. There are smoke grenades that have gone off. The police, it looks to me as though they are making some kind of retreat and regrouping, ready for the next wave of attacks. Projectiles have been thrown at the police there in Paris. It comes after a series of violent protests that have seen shops burnt down, cafes burnt down, police officers attacked, hundreds of people injured initially. And we're seeing scuffles there right now as police are coming in, wielding batons, riot police there, really hitting protesters hard, quite literally. And this has been going on and building steadily since I came on air. This started just before 3 p.m, and we've been bringing you regular live shots of this. When I first started this show, there was a gathering of maybe around 50 protesters. That has now swollen to, it easily is above easily is above 500, could well be at 1,000. There was also just an initial cluster of French riot police. There's now, I can see at least 50 in shot there. I imagine there's more behind the scenes as well. We did also see earlier on French fire brigade officers, it appeared, joining the protest, waving the French flag and joining those protesters. So public servants on public servants there, it would seem. Look, more on that as we get here. Paris is an absolute powder keg at the minute, and initially, it was to do with Emmanuel Macron raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. It's also erupted, though, into people who are saying he's not democratic, he's trying to rush this through without any kind of public consultation, but also people who are rebelling against a so-called globalist agenda. So there we go. That's the latest from Paris. But yes, back now to this big story. It cuts right to the very core of this country, actually. The royal family... Oh, well, they're being questioned again, aren't they? Over alleged links with the slave trade. I'm just going to say something to you now. This is a pretty transparent attempt, I think, to damage the monarchy just before King Charles's coronation. It's exactly a month to go before the coronation. And a historian claims to have found a document dating back to the 1600s that shows a slave trader give shares to King William III. King Charles has expressed his support for the first time, though, into research into the historical links between the British monarchy and the transatlantic slave trade. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure he should have done that. Is he just caving into the woke mob? Buckingham Palace said that Charles takes the issues profoundly seriously, and the royal household will help with the academic project by offering access to the royal collection and the royal archives. So people will now trawl through this, find any link they possibly can from as far back as they can possibly go to nail the royal family when it comes to links to the slave trade. It comes after The Guardian, which recently apologised for its founder's own links to slavery, conducted an investigation into the history of the royal family's potential involvement in the slave trade. I, for one, certainly hope that it turns out that The Guardian has more links to slave trade than our royal family, but there we go. We went out and about to find out what some members of the public thought about this story.
Well, I think it's important that our king comes forward and talks about the issues and, challenges the historical prejudice about slavery and deals that front on and be honest about the situation.
England is a nation that freed slavery, regardless what other nations think, but it's actually England that abolished slavery and started to end the slavery in the Americas and in the United States. So we're a pioneer in freeing slavery. If you look at most castles and places, then obviously we have got a prehistory of slavery, obviously stately homes and things, but yeah, it's good if they can address it, and if there's an apology to be made, then that's, as a nation we can take that on hand.
Apologies for what? Apologies for what? In the 1600s? In the 1600s, someone gave shares to King William III in relation to the slave trade. Oh, I'm desperately sorry about that, absolutely. No apologies for ancient history, says Shirley, echoing my views there. Thank you very much, Shirley. Mike says, stop these historic witch hunts of all our ancestors. There you go. All right, well, look, joining me now is the historian Martin Whittock and the royal commentator Michael Cole. Look, both of you, great to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much. Martin, I will start with you. Why on earth is King Charles even welcome to look into what is ancient history that's got nothing to do with him shortly before his coronation?
Well, I think the thing that needs to be addressed in this is it's not an attack on the monarchy, it's not an attack on King Charles, and it's not concluding what will come out of this. It's not assuming that anything will particularly be a product of this. It is simply part of an ongoing investigation into the history of the country, the history of the monarchy. And I would say this is simply what historians do. This is what we do all the time. We look at evidence, we explore evidence, and in this case, it is somebody involved with University of Manchester, with historic royal palaces, who's investigating the connection between the monarchy and slavery. Now, as a historian, I welcome the whole picture. I welcome looking at the whole situation, and I think that basically what we're talking about here is trying to work out what happened and investigating it. We're not assuming any outcome from that, but I think that is what historians do. But I also think we need to remember that the King is the head of the Commonwealth and that many Caribbean countries obviously have a very deep interest in this. And I think he has real concerns about this and he wants to be open about this. He's not assuming, and we shouldn't assume any outcome from this. This is simply what historians do.
Look, but you just have to look at the headlines of this, and I respect you, Martin, but I think that's incredibly naive because you have to look at the headlines of this. Pictures of King Charles Charles's face there next to it, links to the slave trade, all of this stuff. He's got absolutely no links to the slave trade, this guy, whatsoever. It's from the 1600s, this, and it's absolutely bonkers as far as I'm concerned. Michael, can you just come in on this? Because I'm telling you what, this will just be the start of something where, in the end, King Charles will have to flagellate himself outside Buckingham Palace. I'm so sorry for what some bloke I've never met has done years ago, centuries ago in this country, Michael.
Yeah, well, this historian will be investigating Prince Charles's, King Charles's Dutch and German ancestors, including King William IV, who was known as the Sailor King. He was the uncle of Queen Victoria. And that brings us into the Royal Navy, because when Britain was the first civilized country in the world to ban the slave trade in 1807, the Royal Navy did wonderful work intercepting 1,600 slave ships and freeing 150,000 slaves. And in the process, they lost almost exactly the same number of sailors to death and injury out there. So it was one sailor for every slave ship lost. And it is true, of course, that every single stately home in England was built before the slave trade was banned and before income tax came in. But some of the biggest supporters of the slave trade during the American Civil War were the cotton barons of Lancashire, because they depended upon the southern states to make their fortunes in those mills in northwest England. So this is a very tangled web. And whether it's wise or not for Prince Charles, King Charles, as he must be now known, to get involved in this, I think is probably problematic for him.
They won't stop. This is the annoying thing. They won't stop. You only have to look at what's going on with the climate agenda. They got basically everything that they wanted, and then they want more of it. They want us all sleeping on moss in caves and just eating tofu the whole time. Martin, look, do you think that the King really should just tell them where to go? Because, you know, like I've said, they will not stop this lot, and before you know it, it will be apology central. And us, it's symptomatic, this, of people who just want to tear Britain apart.
I do think it's very important that we don't assume any outcome from this, any product from this. At the moment, all we're doing is investigating. And as a historian, and obviously the King has a great interest in history, he's simply allowing the opening up of the archives. So I would say we must challenge some of the sound bites, because we don't know what's going to happen with this. We should challenge some of the headlines, because we don't know what's going to happen with this. But as a historian, I'm always keen to see archives open and the wider picture known. And if some people make of that things that we are not happy with, then we need to challenge that. But at this point, I would say we shouldn't panic about this. This is simply opening up of the archives. After that, there may become debates about apologies, reparations, etc., but those are different arguments. This is simply about historians doing their job, looking at the archives, and I think we shouldn't be scared about that. And I think what the last spokesperson was saying is absolutely correct, that amazing things were done by the West Africa Squadron of the Royal Navy after 1807 in quite extraordinary ways. But if we're going to get the whole picture of the slave trade, we need to see what happened before and afterwards, not draw conclusions from that at this stage, but let's just investigate it and see what the situation is.
Well, I get what you're saying, but the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that it is a massively political story, because it's still on the front page of the BBC's website. Think of all of the global news there, and here is a study from the University of Manchester conducted by a couple of people that may or may not introduce anything. And the BBC, who did not, by the way, put the Telford grooming gang scandal on their homepage for quite a while, have decided to lead with this story for a very long time. The Guardian have got it everywhere as well. I mean, I think it's absolutely bonkers. Michael, can I have some apology from the Vikings or the Romans, please?
Well, I tell you where you are absolutely right, Patrick, and this is true even today, that ill-informed newspapers and agencies around the world are now even talking about His Majesty the King paying reparations for slavery. And of course, that is patently absurd. First of all, who would the money go to and how would it be calculated? And the whole historical thing would have to be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, which of course it cannot be. This is all history. This is all the past. And anybody who's come to this country and gloried in it and actually appreciates being here can appreciate that that is all part of the rich fabric of British life. It happened. It's regrettable. We wish we didn't do it. But listen, in 1838, we abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. It was another 28 years before that happened in America, and that took a civil war to bring it about. So our record isn't as bad as it's made out to be, and we've got a lot to be proud of in the way that we suppressed and made sure that slavery did not happen on our watch again. However, I'm afraid in the modern world, it's happening all over the world, and it's not happening anywhere where the English language is spoken.
There you go. Look, thank you very much, both of you. Great stuff. Martin Whittett there is historian and licensed lay minister for the Church of England, and Michael Cole, royal commentator. Back to Paris now, because I'm just getting it in my ear that there has been a bit of an eruption there. Yes, indeed, there has. This is the violence in Paris, and what we're witnessing there, if you're watching us on TV or online, is an absolutely massive standoff between a bank of riot police with their shields drawn. It looks to me as though they may be about to make a move. They've got their batons there. Fires have been lit just in the last few minutes on a street there in Paris. There are hundreds, if not 1,000 protesters. And what I'm looking at the moment is police with what would appear to me to be those kind of guns that they fire the smoke grenades and the tear gas out of. And it's all because initially Emmanuel Macron wanted to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. And then on top of that as well, it was used as a, if you'll excuse the pun, the firing gun for people who dislike Emmanuel Macron, don't like a globalist agenda, are dissatisfied with general life in Paris, to actually jump on that bandwagon. We're going to stick on these pictures for just a second, because we've got the bank of riot police there. We've got rubbish in the streets being set on fire. Earlier on, we had shops set on fire, cafes set on fire as well, and we are witnessing just all the way down that road in Paris, as the camera zoomed in there, good grief, there's a huge amount of people there who are protesting. People, of course, there are waiting with bated breath to wait and see exactly what happens next. But those fires have just been lit, and it looks as though it's going to be another evening of violence in the French capital. And as we saw last time, it spread, didn't it? Not just from Paris, it spread to Lille, it spread to Lyon, it spread to Bordeaux. And what we're witnessing now is the police charging at protesters. We'll stay with this, I think. The police are just running down the street now, and if the camera does pan round to you, what we did see earlier on was protesters on the other side, and it appears that projectiles are being thrown at them. They're ducking for cover somewhat. They have got their shields drawn, and they are trying to, I think the term is maybe kettle people in a little bit to try to contain some of the protests. The police really are making moves now, and like I've said, they have got their work cut out, and it's just an insight, actually, into how much this has grown, because when I first started this show, there was nothing like this scene. It was a handful of people, pretty much on either side, and the police really have had their work cut out. And it is a standoff now, of course, between people who are very agitated and very angry about, frankly, the standard of living in France, their workers' rights, and also the agenda of their leader, who, for what it's worth, Emmanuel Macron is in China today and is not there in France and in Paris. People there saying that they feel as though he should be to sort out the mess that there is at the moment. Look, Paris is absolutely on a knife edge at the moment. Anything could happen, and we'll bring you the latest as and when we get it with live shots. There we go. Right, OK, look, moving on, because now to the latest on the government's controversial plans to house around 500 migrants on a barge off the coast of Dorset. Minister Richard Holden has defended the policy, and he said that the boat is, quote, not a type of prison. And this actually sparked a bit of anger, because I think quite a few people want it to be a type of prison, don't they? Do they not want reassurances that these single men, hundreds of them, who no one seems to know much about them at all, will not be given free roam of the local area? It's been confirmed that at least 437 people crossed the channel in small boats yesterday alone, and that's the highest number in a single day so far this year. GBNews viewers can see footage of even more migrants who arrived at Dover. That's earlier today, by the way, so I think, to coin a phrase, you're going to need a bigger barge, Rishi. But hundreds of single males are due to be housed on the Bibby Stockholm off the coast of Dorset, and that is despite threats of legal action and opposition from local Tory MP Richard Drax. GBNews understands that an email has now been sent out by the Home Office stating further meetings could take place with the local council on the 18th of April. In fact, we got that information live on this show in the last hour from a local councillor who, up until that point, was saying that they hadn't really had any communication from the Home Office at all. Well, the locals haven't been too happy with the decision. Earlier on, we caught up with the Mayor of Portland, who shared his concerns.
The issue that I have is with 500 asylum seekers being inserted into the island of Portland at very short notice is the strain that it's going to put on local support services. Not only local support services for Portland residents, but also obviously for these asylum seekers themselves.
Yes, there we go. Now, I actually am a bit sick and tired of MPs being asked, would you live on that boat? Would you live on that barge? And them going, well, but maybe. Just say no. Just say, no, I would not live on that barge, because that barge is not supposed to be a particularly comfortable place to live. It's supposed to be a deterrent, which is why it's there. I'm joined now, I believe, by Olivia Utley, who is outside the Home Office. Olivia is, of course, our wonderful political reporter. Yes, Olivia, it is a deeply, deeply controversial scheme, this. Some people are saying, though, that the people of Dorset need to do their bit, but the Home Office now finally has at least bothered to communicate with them.
Yes, the Home Office is clearly trying to patch up relations with the Conservative council down in Dorset and Conservative MP Richard Drax, but the very fact that they were even talking about taking legal action against the government, a Conservative council, shows just how deep the feelings run. And yes, there are people who say that the people of Dorset should do their bit, but I'm sure it won't just be them. Suella Braverman has made this plan for 500 migrants off the Dorset coast for now. There's talk about 2,000 migrants being housed off a different area of coast. They haven't yet said where at a later date on another barge. Isn't it quite likely that the local residents there will put up a fight as well? So if this is the government's plan to house migrants in barges off the coast, I think it won't just be the people of Dorset who have something to say about it.
Absolutely, Olivia, thank you very much, and well done for battling what sounds like a helicopter and a tank going past you at the same time there from outside the Home Office. I believe we can go now, though, to an individual who lives in the Dover area, OK? We're always keen here. We are the People's Channel, GB News. We want to speak to just real people. And he moved, he's called Alex, and I believe he moved to Dover only last year. I think we can bring Alex up now. Alex, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, look, just talk with you. Are you... Patrick. All right. Are you concerned, or do you not care? I want to know what you think about this barge.
Well, we moved down to Dorset in October of last year from Dover, and we experienced there what I can only describe as nightmarish. When it comes down to this, there was no public consultation at all for these 500 single adult males who will be here, from what I've been told, 18 months. I know that the matter has been discussed privately between the Home Office and the private port, which I have been talking to MP Richard Drax about. The residents and how they feel, from what I've seen and what I feel myself, they are deeply concerned. They're thinking of leaving the area, frankly, and selling up. They're fearful that their children will be in danger from the arrival of these 500 single men, and some are even suggesting that the barge be towed out into the Channel, while others that it goes out into the Thames, maybe, outside Parliament, or even better, not at all, Patrick.
So, do you think that it should be a prison ship, i.e. people should not be allowed off it? And if you do think that, why?
I think we have a lot of questions, really. How are they going to be released? Are they going to be monitored? Where are they going to go? And what happens if they fail to return? These questions have no answers so far. Yes, the barge in itself will be a quasi-prison where hundreds of young men will spend most of the time, but what are they going to do? The port itself is restricted. What about their welfare? What happens if there's even trouble on board? And I know from speaking with Richard Drax that none of those issues have been addressed so far, and there is concern.
Alex, what would you say to people who say, look, we need, as a country, to offer some form of deterrent, OK? And that means that somewhere in the country there's going to have to be something like this. So, sorry, you've drawn the short straw, fair people of Portland, wonderful people of Dorset. It's going to be you, and you're going to have a barge in your harbour. Suck it up for the good of the country.
Frankly, Patrick, I don't think that's fair on the people of this area. There's a lot of elderly residents here who are concerned about their businesses, they're concerned about their families. I understand, yes, this is a problem that has been put on people. That's not fair either. I don't think we should be dealing with this. I think it should be stopped at the source and dealt with properly.
Look, Alex, thank you very much. I can say I really, really appreciate you coming on, and I would love to speak to you again because this is going to keep rolling, I think, Alex, and it's great to speak to real people at the scene, so thank you. That's Alex there, who is a local resident, and I think that sums it up, doesn't it, really? Right, OK, look, we're a bit pressed for time here, but moving on now, because a coroner said yesterday that 2 pensioners died because their car broke down on a smart motorway. These things are death traps, people. How dangerous are they? What are your views on smart motorways? And I've got a little bit of news for you, which might lighten it a little bit because, well, you'll have to stay tuned to find out. This is Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. Lively show this, and I've got a little bit more coming your way before I clock off. As the UK's biggest teaching union votes in favour of more drag queens being invited into schools, are kids being over-sexualised? Channel 4 have just done a show called Naked Education, where fully grown men and women get their kit off and just expose themselves to kids. Does anyone else think this is just bonkers? Or just me? It can't just be me. Please tell me it's not just me. Anyway, there we go. Look, we've got loads more coming your way. I believe we can take you to Paris a little bit as well, because, yes, there are live shots where it's kicking right off in Paris yet again. Clashes between riot police and protesters over a whole host of reasons. I can summarise it quite succinctly, though, and say they absolutely hate Macron. Now, though, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Efforts to weed out hundreds of potentially corrupt police officers from Britain's biggest force are underway. Counter-terrorism officers, along with those who tackle serious organised crime, have been drafted in to help clean up the Metropolitan Police Force. Of more than 1,000 cases, nearly 700 will now be reassessed, with almost 200 referred to formal risk management or vetting. Figures also reveal 161 serving Met officers have criminal convictions. Labour has described a plan to house asylum seekers on a barge and disused military bases as evidence of failure. That's after the government confirmed it's to sign a deal to use the Bibby Stockholm, which can accommodate 500 people. The plans are designed to free up hotels, which are currently housing more than 50,000 asylum seekers who are all waiting for their claims to be processed. And police investigating the spending of the Scottish National Party's finances have been seen removing boxes of evidence from the home of the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Yesterday, her husband, the former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell, was arrested and then released without charge. Ms Sturgeon was due to attend a climate change event this evening, but she's now cancelled her appearance. And the King has signalled his support for research into the British monarchy's historical links with transatlantic slavery. King Charles and the Queen Consort have meanwhile been at a Maundy Thursday service in York today, where the monarch presented specially minted coins to local people, thanking them for their outstanding Christian service. The royals were greeted by well-wishers and a handful of demonstrators holding banners reading "Not My King." Those are your latest news headlines. You are up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Back to Patrick.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
First, now a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound buying you $1.2456 and €1.1393. The price of gold stands at £617.69 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed at 7,741 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Welcome back. Now, look, smart motorways are the bane of a lot of people's existence, aren't they? But this is a big development that will affect millions of road users. It's been reported that no new smart motorways are set to be built in the UK because of serious safety concerns. Now, viewers on GB News can see footage of the M4 near London, where work to turn the route into a smart motorway was finished last year to keep traffic flowing smoothly, they say. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a car park, isn't it? But there we go. But the absence of a hard shoulder in sections of that motorway has led to deaths of many people. And today's news comes just a day after a coroner said an accident on a stretch of the M1 in South Yorkshire, which left 2 pensioners dead, would not have happened if there had been a hard shoulder. A little earlier, I spoke to a lady called Claire, who sadly lost her husband as a result of a collision and just the ongoing lunacy that took place after that because of a smart motorway and because there's no hard shoulder. This is Claire.
My husband was killed on a smart motorway 4 years ago. He just set off for work at 8:15 one Friday. He had a minor collision with another motorist. It should have just been, an inconvenience, a bad start to the day. But because they were at a sign that said no hard shoulder for 4 miles, and 4 years ago we knew less about smart motorways than we do now. They didn't know what to do, I assume. And I don't know if they also assumed, like a lot of other people, that the technology actually works. Perhaps they thought the gantries and things would pick them up. They pulled over as far left as they could, but they couldn't get their vehicles out of the live running lane because of the crash barrier, and they themselves couldn't get over the crash barrier because there was a 30-foot drop. So the 2 of them ended up stood in a live lane at 8:15 on a Friday morning, and the inevitable happened. A HGV that can't manoeuvre like a Fiat 500 ploughed into them bodily and spread carnage across 4 lanes of the motorway.
Look, just do go online and on Twitter and see the full version of that interview, because that was absolutely harrowing. She goes into graphic detail, Claire, about exactly what happened to her husband and numerous other people that day. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it is necessary to hear that stuff, because this is what smart motorways does. How on earth can anyone in their right minds think that removing a hard shoulder from 3 or 4 lanes of, at times, fast-moving traffic is in any way safer? And you know what they say? They say, oh, save you 4 minutes on your commute to work, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes back. People are dying, right? I don't care about extra. And also, that's rubbish as well. They swore that. That's rubbish as well, isn't it? Because you're always sat in traffic. With me now is Howard Cox, who's the founder of Fair Fuel UK. Howard, a smart motorway is a death trap.
Without doubt. And Claire Mercer must take a hell of a lot of credit.
Yeah.
Because she's been campaigning for years, and I've been in contact with her quite a lot. I've got nothing but admiration in a time of real suffering for the woman. And it's a terrible thing. What is amazing about these motorways is, you quite rightly, someone got up one morning and said, I've got this great idea. Let's use the hard shoulder as an extra lane. It's building roads on the cheap. That's why they did it. That's the thing. And that's really got to get that across. They did that. And I've got that firsthand from
So just talk me through this again, because a lot of people are scratching their heads going, why smart motorways? Why smart motorways? Have we just been fed a load of utter guff here, which is, oh, it'll save you time on your commute and all of this stuff and it'll be safer? The reality is they didn't have the space, so they thought, you know what we're going to do to cope with massive population control and massive amounts of people now driving on these roads? We're just going to get rid of the hard shoulder, slap an extra lane in and tell you it's safer.
Well, absolutely. And guess what? There was no consultation with the people, the stakeholders. We're used to that, aren't we? We've got that happening in London with regarding ultra-low emission zones and all those sorts of things. The fact is, this is safety, and it's complete and utter absurdity as how anyone actually pushed this through. I actually would call for, and I'm willing to work with Claire on this, call for someone to be held to account, more than account, and that's Highways England and, of course, the Transport Ministry.
Yeah, indeed. And the other element to this was just about bearable. Smart motorways would have been just about bearable if the technology required for them to work actually worked itself. I reported on a story about 6 months or a year ago where the cameras that are on the motorway is designed to see if you've had an accident and they shut the motorway down or they tell you to reduce your speed. Those cameras were steaming up and they had to be pointed at the sun
to dry them
out. So in the meantime, you have a crash, you blow a tyre, you pull over, a lorry driver comes straight through the back of you, carnage, people die. The technology's not fit for purpose.
And also, there are cash-grabbing schemes. As you know, when you've got a red X up there, if you actually waver into that lane, but guess what? The camera works then, and it tells you get a little letter in the post, you've got 83 points and £80 fine. The thing is, this is absurd, and I really do believe someone should be held to account for this.
Look, 100%. OK, so you welcome today's announcement now, though?
Oh, absolutely.
No more smart motorways. But do you want the existing ones, what? I mean, demolish? The fact is, it's going to cost us either way. The little guy loses.
Well, here we go again. Absolutely. Of course we should restore hard shoulders again. It with absolute sense. 50 people have actually died because of this.
Shocking.
And it's a mass murder to me, and it's orchestrated by an ignorant group. And we've got no road user strategy or long-term road user strategy in this country. We haven't got a clue. Our government is completely clueless when it comes to the motoring.
Is there any evidence whatsoever to say now, though, that fewer people are dying on these motorways than they were on existing motorways?
Well, they will come out with that sort of evidence, but I think one loss is enough. This is 50 of them. And Claire pointed that out. This is ridiculous. And I'm sorry, where do you actually, when you break down, where do you stop? You're going to be hit by a HGV behind you.
Yeah, it's absolutely lunatic, isn't it? But anyway, there we go. Thank you very much. That's, of course, Howard Cox there, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Right, now, moving on to another one that's got you all going today, actually. A leading teaching union has voted to invite more drag queens into schools to speak to your kids. I've got a pretty straightforward question here. Why? Just show me the educational benefits to all of this. I do not understand it at all. And it comes as Channel 4 have paid people to get their kit off full frontal in front of children as young as 14 as part of some weird sex education thing. I'm sorry, isn't that flashing? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. I'm going to take you to Paris quickly, though, now, because this is happening live. We've been taking this throughout the course of the show. Riots in Paris, massive clashes between the police and protesters. I'll bring you more on that as we get it. Patrick Christys here on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are. We don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. So, we told you yesterday that the President-elect of the UK's biggest teaching union has claimed the government is, quote, brutally racist. Well, the National Education Union is under the spotlight again today after its members voted to invite more drag queens into schools. So, there's been previous events all over the country, hasn't there, despite a number of protests from concerned parents. Teachers have now given their backing to inviting LGBT plus authors to speak in schools. Now, look, that's all right in itself, isn't it? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's a more kind of drag queen element to this, and potentially if some of those performances turn graphic towards kids. Now, earlier this week, Channel 4 broadcast a programme called Naked Education, where adults, and I can't believe I'm saying this, stripped butt naked in front of children as young as 14. I thought you used to get locked up for doing that kind of stuff, but there we go. Joining me now is Peter Tatchell, who's an LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, and Ollie London, who's a social media influencer and author of Gender Madness. Peter, I will start with you. Can you give me any evidence whatsoever that inviting a drag queen into a school benefits kids' education?
Well, the context of this motion by the National Education Union is that nearly half of all young LGBT plus pupils in our schools say they're being victimized and bullied because of their sexuality and gender identity. So the teaching union wants to help tackle that bullying and that prejudice to inform and educate people and to support LGBT plus kids in schools so they don't suffer the way they currently do.
And does bringing a drag queen in help with that?
Sorry?
Does bringing a drag queen in help with that?
Well, most of the people that are going to be invited to the schools are vetted, qualified professional LGBT plus people who will talk about LGBT plus history, social issues and so on. Nothing to do with sex whatsoever. The drag queens, there's research which shows that drag queen story time does have a very effective response from young people. A boring teacher, no disrespect to teachers, but a boring everyday teacher won't get as much interest as a drag queen coming into the school.
This is an utter capitulation, Peter. This is an utter.
There is no sex involved whatsoever.
Peter, if teaching in this country has resorted to, I can't get these kids' attention, so I'm going to put a frock on. I mean, I think is that the level we're at? Look, Ollie, I'll bring you in now. Ollie London here is a social media influencer and author of Gender Madness. I want to make it very clear, there's nothing against the idea of drag queens in general. I just find it bizarre that you would introduce them into a school for very young children, and we have seen performances taking place in some cases where they've been quite graphic, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, why do we have this constant push recently to be bringing drag queens that are typically sexualised acts in front of children? We've seen many exposés of drag shows. In the UK, there was one recently with babies as young as 2, with people in fetish gear twerking in front of the kids. So we see time and time again these drag acts become sexualised. And there are drag queens out there that are perfectly fine, and nobody's got a problem with that. But it's when you are bringing this into schools. Why do we need to have this in schools? Why can't we just continue teaching kids English, sports, history? Why this constant push to confuse kids with gender ideology? I just think it's so harmful.
Peter, is there a wider issue here about the exposure of graphic adult sexual, organs in the cases of this Channel 4 show about naked education? I mean, do you not think there's something a bit weird, Peter, about people who want to go on national television and get their bits out in front of kids?
Well, first let me say there is no sexual content in any drag queen performance in schools. Schools would never allow anything sexual to take place in a school. It's against the school regulations, the government's advice and so on. The example that was just given was to a mother and baby club with the agreement of the mothers. It was to entertain the mothers, not the babies. And the babies are too young to understand what was going on anyway. But the wider issue that you raise, I mean, yes, I don't think it's appropriate for nudity in front of young people. Of course not. But, Channel 4's Naked Education is an attempt to educate young people about sexual health, sexual safety, and positive, constructive, supportive relationships. So in that sense, it is good. I'm not too sure whether the nakedness is actually justified.
Frankly, that's my main issue with it, really, isn't it? But Ollie, you're shaking your head there. Go on.
Yeah, well, firstly, that's completely untrue what Peter said. There was a school in the Isle of Wight where drag queens were teaching sex education to teenagers, very young teenagers. So, firstly, we know that there are many drag queens that sexualise things. They're teaching sex education and gender ideology. Kids should not be learning this at school. They should be learning the basic subjects to get ahead in life. They should not be sexualised with these things. So it does exist, Peter. I completely disagree with what he's saying there.
Peter, go on.
You said the Isle of Wight. Are you sure it was the Isle of Wight, not the Isle of Man?
Does it matter?
It doesn't matter, Peter.
The Isle of Man was accused of that. They did a full and thorough investigation, and it was proven those allegations are completely and totally false.
OK.
All right. Happened in an Isle of Man school.
OK, fair enough, absolutely fair enough. Now, look, Peter, I just want to know, do you think that parents who might be thinking, look, I don't really necessarily, I'm a bit uncomfortable about the idea of men in drag coming in and reading a book to my kid or doing anything, really, around the school, do you think that those parents are transphobic?
No, I think they have legitimate concerns, but it's not a concern that's based on rationality, because many of those parents will take their kids to a Christmas pantomime where dames are dressed up in drag, everybody has a great laugh, it's harmless fun. It's the same in the school. Just the kids have a laugh, they get engaged, they read the books, which, of course, the teachers should have been able to teach them, but they weren't. So they brought the drag queens in, and they got a result. Literacy and reading skills went up.
I get what you're saying, Peter, but the idea that teachers have to resort to drag queens... Ollie, one quick one, very quickly. Look, do you think that at the very core of this, that parents would have any legitimate concern about some form of indoctrination, i.e. some parents, no doubt Peter would say wrongly, but some parents would look at this and go, well, I sent my kid to school and they've come back and they've had some indoctrination and now they're talking about being born into the wrong body, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. We see, many whistleblowers exposing this, that kids are being taught things by teachers without parental consent. So, why does a teacher have a right to teach a kids about changing their pronouns, changing their gender when they're 5 or 6 years old? That's the conversation between a parent and their child.
Both of you really enjoyed that. Thank you very, very much. Ollie London there, social media influencer, and also Peter Tatchell as well, who is an LGBTQ activist. Emily Carver is with me in studio, filling in for Jews. Michelle Dewberry, what you got on?
I am indeed. It's quite interesting. I had a little chat with a drag queen earlier today who does this story time stuff, and it was utterly bizarre.
Right.
I'm no clearer on why.
It's the answer.
That's
Why?
why I was asking why. And there's this sort of, they say, inclusion and all this, but it's all sort of very vague and nonsensical. I'm not sure what it's all about.
I just think it's a complete capitulation. And if I wanted to go and read to kids at schools, which I don't, presumably I would have to put a wig on. But there we go.
It's all about them. It's all about them having fun themselves.
OK, well, there you go. More of this coming your way, no doubt, with Emily Carver. I've been Patrick Christys. See you tomorrow at 3.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Some lively downpours out there this afternoon. They will ease later. Then it's a fine start to the Easter weekend. Plenty of sunshine to look forward to for Friday, Saturday and into Sunday. In the meantime, a weather front has crossed the country. That's clearing to the east, bringing some persistent rain still across parts of the Northern Isles. But across the rest of the UK, some instability in the atmosphere and so some heavy showers still remaining into the evening, and those showers will primarily affect southern and eastern parts of the country before eventually skies clear and even the rain across Shetland eases overnight. So for the vast majority, it's a dry and clear night with light winds as well. Temperatures will fall away. Low single figures in towns and cities, just below freezing in the countryside, and so a touch of frost first thing this Good Friday. But despite the chill in the air first thing, actually plenty of sunny skies. Blue skies across the board through Friday morning after any early mist patches in the west clear away. And then some fair weather cloud building as the temperatures rise in the morning, but otherwise a lot of fine weather out there. One exception, the east coast, where we will see some mist and low cloud into the afternoon. Cooler here, but elsewhere with the sunny skies, 14 to 16 Celsius. And then we keep those clear skies into Friday evening. As a result, once again, it's going to be a chilly night with a touch of frost in places. I think we'll avoid a frost for Northern Ireland, where we'll have some higher cloud and a bit more of a breeze. And for the east coast of Scotland, as well as eastern England, we'll keep some of that mist and low cloud, so frost-free here. But in between, temperatures falling just above or just below freezing in most places.